Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the darkness. Not the darkness you know, the kind with streetlights bleeding through curtains or a phone screen glowing on a nightstand. Real darkness, the kind that has weight to it. You're lying on a bed of dried grass and animal hide, pressed close to a handful of other bodies for warmth. Somewhere near your feet, embers glow orange in a shallow pit, the last breath of a fire that's been kept alive since dawn. Outside, the wind moves through grasslands that stretch farther than you can imagine, and somewhere out there, something is moving. You don't know what, you never fully know what, that uncertainty, that thin membrane between safety and danger that was just Tuesday 100,000 years ago. What did it actually take to survive a night like this? Not just once, but thousands and thousands of nights in a row, for years, for generations, for the entire span of a human life that might only last 30 years if you were lucky. What did you need to know? Who did you need beside you? What sounds made you tense up in the dark? And which ones let you finally relax enough to sleep? These are the questions we're going to sit with tonight. Not as a lecture, not as a list of facts to memorize, but as something closer to time travel. A slow, quiet walk back through 100,000 years to a version of humanity that looked like us, felt fear like us, loved their children like us, but lived in a world so different from ours that it's almost hard to picture. Before we go there, if you're listening to this to help you drift off, that's exactly what this is for. So get comfortable, let your eyes stay closed if they already are, and just let the words carry you. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what time it is where you are. I read through the comments, and it's honestly one of my favourite parts of doing this. Someone's in Tokyo just waking up, while someone else is in Chicago finally closing their eyes. It's a strange kind of company, all of us scattered across different time zones, drifting off to the same ancient story. And if you'd rather listen without any ads interrupting or music layered underneath, I do post these episodes on Spotify as well, completely ad-free and music-free, just the voice and the story. There's a link down in the description if that sounds like the kind of quiet you're looking for. Now, over the course of this journey, we're going to slowly rebuild what life actually looked like 100,000 years ago. We'll explore the world itself, the ice, the grasslands, the animals that don't exist anymore. We'll meet the other kinds of humans who were alive at the same time as us, because believe it or not, Homo sapiens wasn't alone on this planet back then. We'll follow a single day from the first grey light of dawn to the final flicker of firelight at night. We'll talk about family, about the small bands of people who depended on each other completely, about shelter and hunting and the quiet, endless work of finding food. We'll look at the tools they carved from stone and bone, the clothes they stitched together to survive winters we can barely imagine, and the injuries and illnesses that could turn deadly without warning. We'll wonder about the words they might have spoken, the beliefs they might have held, the marks they left behind that suggest they were thinking about more than just survival. And through all of it, we'll come back again and again to one simple truth. Every single comfort you have tonight, the roof over your head, the blanket around you, the quiet safety of your own bed, all of it exists because somewhere in the deep, cold dark of prehistory, someone made it through the night. So let's begin where they did, in the dark, around 100,000 years ago. To understand the darkness we just sat in, you have to understand the world that made it. And that world, 100,000 years ago, was not one single climate, one single landscape, one single anything. It was a planet in constant motion, shifting beneath the feet of everyone who lived on it, though the shifts happened so slowly that no single person would have noticed. A lifetime was too short to see the changes. Only the deep memory of geology and ice remembers what was really happening. At this point in Earth's history, We were living inside what scientists call the Pleistocene, an epoch defined by its wild temperature swings. Ice ages came and went, not as sudden events, but as slow tidal movements stretching across tens of thousands of years. Glacial periods, when massive ice sheets crept down from the poles, alternated with interglacial periods, brief warmer windows when the ice retreated and the world softened for a while. 100,000 years ago sat close to the boundary of one of these warmer interglacial phases, a moment of relative mildness sandwiched between colder eras that had come before and colder eras still to come. Relative is the important word here. Warmer didn't mean warm. It meant survivable, which in that world was sometimes all you could ask for. These climate shifts didn't just change the temperature. They changed the very shape of the world. Locked up in glacial ice, enormous volumes of water pulled sea levels down, sometimes over 300 feet lower than what we see today. Coastlines that we would recognize simply didn't exist. Instead, there were vast stretches of exposed land where shallow seas now sit, land bridges connecting continents that today are separated by water. Britain was attached to mainland Europe. Asia and North America were joined by a wide stretch of grassland we now call Beringia. Southeast Asia and its islands were fused into one enormous landmass, sometimes called Sunderland, home to forests and rivers that have long since vanished beneath the waves. These weren't obscure geological footnotes, they were highways. They were the very paths that allowed early humans and other human species alongside them to walk into territories their ancestors could never have imagined reaching. And the landscapes themselves, once you arrived, were staggeringly varied. In parts of Africa, the environment your ancestors called home might have been open savanna, golden grass stretching to a horizon broken only by the occasional acacia tree, or scattered rock outcrops offering shade and shelter. In other regions, dense forests pressed close together, humid and alive with sound. Along the coasts there were tidal flats and estuaries rich with shellfish, an entirely different kind of survival strategy built around the rhythm of the tides rather than the migration of herds. Further north, in the parts of the world where Neanderthals were adapting to entirely different pressures, the landscape turned to open steppe and tundra, cold grasslands broken by patches of stunted trees, and eventually, at the edges of the ice sheets themselves, landscapes that must have felt almost otherworldly in their starkness. It's worth pausing here to imagine what it meant to share this world with animals we can barely picture today. This was the age of megafauna, creatures on a scale that modern nature documentaries can only hint at. Woolly mammoths moved across the cold grasslands in family herds, their tusks curving longer than a grown man is tall. Giant ground sloths, some as large as a small car, browsed through forests in the Americas. Saber-toothed cats stalked prey with jaws built for a world that demanded brutal efficiency. Cave bears, far larger than any bear alive today, denned in the same caves early humans might have wanted to shelter in themselves, which, as you can imagine, occasionally led to conflict. Herds of bison, wild horses, aurochs, and giant deer, with antlers spanning over 12 feet, moved across the plains in numbers that would be almost impossible to witness today. This was not a quiet world, it was full, teeming, and often dangerous. Every landscape alive with creatures who saw humans not as the dominant species, but as just one more thing trying to survive. All of this, the ice, the shifting coastlines, the wildly different landscapes, shaped where people could live, and just as importantly, where they could move. Geography wasn't just a backdrop to human life. It was practically a member of the family, deciding which valleys stayed lush, which rivers kept flowing, which coastal paths remained walkable, and which routes disappeared beneath rising seas a few thousand years later. A group following a herd of game animals might find themselves gradually walking into an entirely new continent, without ever making a single dramatic decision to do so. Migration, then, wasn't necessarily some bold, purposeful journey. Often it was simply following the land as it changed, chasing rainfall, chasing food, chasing safety one season at a time. Now it's important to say clearly that much of what we know about this ancient climate comes from indirect evidence. Ice cores pulled from Antarctica and Greenland, ancient pollen buried in lake sediments, isotopes locked inside coral reefs and cave formations. Scientists piece together temperature and rainfall patterns like detectives working a very, very cold case. And the further back in time you go, the blurrier the picture becomes. Dates shift as new evidence emerges, interpretations get revised. What we're really doing when we talk about this world 100,000 years ago is building the most careful reconstruction we can, using clues left behind in ice and stone and soil, always open to revision, always aware that we are looking at shadows of a world we can never fully see. Still shadowy as it is, it's enough to start imagining the shape of a life. And it's into this shifting, dangerous, breathtaking landscape that our ancestors were about to discover they were not alone. When you picture early humans, it's easy to imagine a single kind of person walking across those ancient grasslands and tundras. One species, one story, marching slowly toward the present. But 100,000 years ago, the world was far stranger and far more crowded than that simple picture allows. If you stood in that time and looked around the planet, you would not see just one kind of human. You would be living in an age of cousins. In Africa, there were people very much like you, Homo sapiens. Not modern in every detail, not yet living in cities or planting crops, but recognizably us. Their faces and bodies would not look out of place in a crowd today. If you dressed one in modern clothing and sat them down on a subway, most people would not notice anything unusual. Their brains were roughly the same size as ours, their hands just as capable, their minds already moving toward the kind of symbolic and flexible thinking that would eventually give rise to art, myth, and science. But if you travelled north and west, crossing deserts and grasslands into the colder edges of Europe and Western Asia, you would eventually move into the territory of Neanderthals. These were humans too, members of the same wider family, but shaped by different pressures, tuned to a different environment. Stockier bodies, barrel-shaped chests, powerful limbs built to hold heat and move through snow and steep hillsides. Faces with projecting midsections, strong brow ridges, wide noses adapted to warm icy air before it reached their lungs. They were not cave brutes, despite the way they were sometimes imagined in the past. Their brains were as large as ours, in some measurements even slightly larger. Their skeletons show the scars and healed fractures of dangerous hunts and communal care. Someone was looking after the injured long enough for bones to knit. Someone was bringing them food when they could not walk. These were not mindless beasts. They were a different way of being human. Further east, across the wide sweep of Asia, another branch of our family tree had taken shape, the Denisovans. For a long time they were completely unknown. A few teeth and fragments of bone discovered in a Siberian cave did not look dramatic. The real revelation came from inside those bones, ancient DNA, carrying a genetic signature distinct from both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. A third major human lineage, hiding in plain sight inside modern genomes. We still don't know exactly what Denisovans looked like. No complete skeleton has been found, but their DNA tells a story. It appears in people from Tibet, from parts of China, from the islands of Southeast Asia, from populations in New Guinea and Australia. That pattern suggests Denisovans once roamed a vast range, from cold northern forests to tropical coasts, adapting in their own ways to high mountains, deep valleys, and island chains scattered across the ancient seascape. And there were others too at the edges of this time. On the islands of Indonesia, small-bodied humans known as Homo floresiensis, sometimes nicknamed the hobbits, may still have been present, though the exact dates are debated. On the Philippine island of Luzon, another small-bodied species, Homo luzonensis, leaves hints of its presence in bones and teeth. These island people probably never met you if you were living in Africa 100,000 years ago, but they were part of the wider human story, parallel experiments in surviving on a restless planet. The ranges of these species were not neat, separate zones coloured in on a map. They blurred and overlapped. Neanderthal territory spread from Western Europe into the Middle East. Early Homo sapiens populations, moving gradually out of Africa in waves that may have started before the famous migration 60,000 years ago, likely pushed into some of those same regions. Denisovans at times seem to have shared landscapes with both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in parts of Asia. Coastlines, mountain passes, river valleys, and shifting climate zones meant that frontiers were always moving. When different human species met, they did not only fight, they also mated. We know this not from tales or tools, but from the quiet record of DNA. Almost everyone today with ancestry outside of sub-Saharan Africa carries small fragments of Neanderthal DNA, usually between 1 and 2%. People from certain parts of Asia and Oceania carry additional Denisovan DNA, sometimes in higher amounts. These are not random leftovers. Some of these borrowed genes seem to help with things like immune responses, skin adaptation to sunlight, or living at high altitude. They are traces of ancient encounters that left lasting marks. If you could sit by a campfire where two such groups met, the differences would be visible, but the similarities would be overwhelming. All of them walked upright, used fire, cared for children, and understood danger. All of them shaped stone into tools, knew the taste of hunger and the weight of grief. The details of their tools and bodies might differ, but the basic problem was the same. Stay alive in a world that did not care whether you succeeded or not. Were their minds the same as ours? That is harder to answer. Neanderthals buried some of their dead, sometimes with grave goods or careful placement. They collected pigments, modified feathers and shells, and in a few contested sites may have created simple abstract markings on cave walls. Homo sapiens in Africa around this time were engraving patterns on ochre, piercing shells for ornaments, perhaps using pigments for body decoration. Denisovans so far speak to us mostly through DNA, but the sophistication of their genetic adaptations and their spread across diverse environments suggest complex cognition as well. Some researchers think Homo sapiens eventually outcompeted other human species because of more flexible social networks, denser communication, or more elaborate symbolic culture. Others argue that Neanderthals and Denisovans were not so very different in these respects, and that chance, climate swings, and demographic weight, not a sudden leap in superior intelligence, tipped the balance. The debate is ongoing, and new finds can still overturn old certainties. It's also unclear exactly how peaceful or violent these encounters were. Genetic evidence of interbreeding shows that at least some meetings involved intimacy and acceptance, or at least cooperation. At the same time, overlapping territories, limited resources and predators on every side mean that conflict was almost certainly part of the story. There may have been alliances and shared hunts, quiet exchanges of mates or tools, and there may also have been raids, ambushes and fear. All of this is why this era is so compelling to imagine as you drift towards sleep. 100,000 years ago, the world was not waiting for us alone. It was a patchwork of human species, each carrying the imprint of that ancient bottleneck, each solving the puzzle of survival in its own way. When you think about our ancestors from this time, you're really thinking about one branch in a small, crowded forest of related lives. And somewhere in that forest under the shifting sky of the Pleistocene, the particular line that would lead to you was learning how to live alongside others who were almost but not quite the same as us. Imagine now that you are not looking at the whole patchwork of human species spread across continents, but at one small piece of it, a single band of Homo sapiens, perhaps 50 people at most, tucked into a fold of land that has just enough to keep them going. It is just before dawn. You are lying on the ground or on a bed of grass, leaves and skins, wrapped in whatever coverings your group has managed to make. There are no walls or only the most makeshift ones. Perhaps a rocky overhang above you, perhaps a circle of posts and branches, perhaps only the low outline of sleeping bodies, curled close for warmth. The first thing you notice is not light, it is sound. The night insects are fading, their steady background hum slowly giving way to different voices, birds beginning to stir in the trees or in the reeds by a distant stream. A few soft whistles and chirps at first, then more, overlapping, building a loose, unplanned chorus. Somewhere far off, the last call of a night predator returning to cover. Closer by, the faint shuffle of someone already awake, shifting coals in last night's fire, coaxing them back toward flame. You open your eyes and the sky is a pale band above you, not yet bright, but no longer fully dark. The air is cool. If it is the dry season or a colder latitude, your breath might fog faintly as you exhale. If it is the wet season in a warmer region, the air sits heavy and damp on your skin, the smell of earth and vegetation thick and close. Sleep, for your group, is not the neat 8-hour block that many modern societies strive for. Anthropologists studying contemporary foraging peoples notice something else: flexible sleep, often in segments, tuned to light, temperature, and safety. In a Paleolithic camp, it is likely that some people stayed half awake at intervals during the night, tending the fire, listening for danger, soothing crying children. Others drifted in and out of a shallow doze. Deep sleep came in pieces rather than in one unbroken stretch. By this moment before sunrise, most have already slept enough to function. A few will have been awake much of the night and may nap later in the day. The group's rhythm is layered and overlapping, designed, without anyone planning it, to make sure that not everyone is helplessly asleep at the same time. As the light strengthens, the camp begins to loosen from stillness. Children stir first, small bodies wriggling out of coverings, blinking into the grey morning. They murmur, whimper, or laugh quietly, the sounds of sleep falling off them like leaves. Older children, already used to responsibility, may move carefully around them, keeping them from wandering too close to the embers. Adults rise more slowly, stretching stiff joints, feeling the accumulated record of hard days and rough ground in their backs and knees. In almost every direction there is something that needs doing. Some of the older women and men, no longer strong enough for long hunts, turn their first attention to the fire. Even in groups that move often, fire is precious. You do not want to have to start it from scratch if you can help it. Someone who banked the coals before sleeping now pulls apart the ash, finds the glowing heart, and feeds it with dry grass, twigs, and small sticks. Smoke begins to thicken, carrying with it the smell of yesterday's cooking and charred wood. Others head for water. There may be a stream down a small slope, a spring nearby, or a hollow in rock where rain collects. Hands and faces are splashed, clay wiped away, gourds or woven containers filled. Waking outdoors means waking coated in whatever the night has left on you, the fine dust of ash, the tang of sweat, the faint grit of soil. A quick wash is practical, but it is also a small reset, the start of another day of effort. Food, if any is left from the day before, is portioned out. Scraps of roasted meat, softened roots, A handful of gathered seeds or fruits are shared among those who need early energy. Nursing infants feed from their mothers, who may eat first to keep their strength. The group's survival depends on the bodies of these women as much as on the spears of the hunters. Tasks diverge from here, and who does what is shaped by age, skill, and the realities of the season. In the dry season, when game may travel far between water sources, hunters might leave camp early. A few adult men, and sometimes skilled women or older teenagers, gather their spears, stone points, and simple packs. They check the sky, the wind, and each other, perhaps exchanging a few low, practiced words about where to go, following a game trail spotted yesterday, moving toward a distant stand of trees, circling a waterhole where animals are likely to come at dawn. They eat quickly, adjust their gear, and slip out in a loose line, leaving behind the soft crackle of the waking camp for the quieter, watchful silence of the open land. Those who remain have their own morning work. Some prepare for a day of gathering, inspecting baskets, straightening digging sticks, recalling where certain plants were seen last week, or whether a patch of edible tubers might be ready. Others tend to tools, resharpening stone blades, straightening wooden shafts, checking bindings made from sinew or plant fibre. Children may be sent to fetch more fuel, breaking small branches from fallen wood, learning the textures and weights of the forest or the scrub as they go. The exact shape of these tasks shifts with weather and season. On cold mornings near the edge of glacial conditions, the first priority may be simply warmth. People huddle closer to the fire, adding fuel, holding out hands and feet, wrapping furs or hides more tightly around shoulders. Hunts may start later when light and temperature make movement less dangerous. Fatty foods, if available, are highly valued, and early effort may go into checking stored meat or seeking any remaining nuts and seeds rich in calories. In warmer, wetter times, the day's rhythm is more forgiving, but not necessarily easier. Heavy rains might mean waking damp, with clothing and bedding that never fully dry. The morning air carries the smell of wet leaves, mud, and standing water. Mosquitoes and other insects rise with the light. Tasks may include draining water from low spots in camp, shifting sleeping places to drier ground, or moving altogether if the site has become too risky with rising rivers or disease-bearing insects. In some seasons, dawn is the main window of comfortable work. Midday heat can be intense, even dangerous, so people focus their most strenuous activities, tracking, digging, carrying heavy loads, into the cooler hours after sunrise and before the sun reaches its highest point. The morning is a chance to cover distance, to follow fresh tracks, to harvest plants before they wilt. Through all of this, you can imagine the sensory texture of the Paleolithic morning, the smell of smoke, damp earth, and bodies that rarely encounter soap but are used to the open air. The feel of rough plant fibres or softened leather against your skin. The way bare feet register temperature and texture instantly. Cold stone, dusty ground, dewy grass. The layered sounds of a living landscape, bird calls, insect buzz, the distant splash of water, the occasional bark or howl that reminds you large predators also wake hungry. There is no clock to signal when the morning ends. The sky is the clock. As the sun climbs, shadows shorten, and the camp stretches out into the day's full activity. Those who left early are already far away, following hoofprints or scanning for movement. Those staying close are already deep into their own work, shaping the quiet, repetitive tasks that keep the band alive. For all the differences between this world and ours, the rhythm of this dawn is familiar in a deep, bodily way. Waking, warming, eating, dividing labour, setting out together and apart. It is the daily heartbeat of a small group holding on to life in a vast, indifferent landscape, one sunrise at a time. If you step back from the smoke and movement of the morning and look at the group as a whole, you can begin to see its shape. Archaeologists and anthropologists, studying both ancient remains and modern foraging peoples, notice a pattern. Humans, when we live by hunting and gathering, tend to cluster in small, flexible bands. Not the thousands or millions of a modern city, more like 20, 30, maybe up to 50 people who know each other's faces, voices and histories in intimate detail. That is roughly the size of the group you woke up in. It is not random. It is probably built around a core of relatives, a few older women and men, their adult children, their children's partners, and a scattering of in-laws and more distant kin. There might be a grandmother who has seen more than 60 summers, a rarity and a treasure. A man who has taken wives from 2 different bands at different times in his life. A cluster of siblings and cousins who have never known a world without each other. But kinship in a Paleolithic band is not as simple as a modern family tree printed on paper. It is more like a web made of blood ties, marriages, adoptions, and shared history. Modern hunter-gatherer societies show that children who lose parents are often folded into other households without fanfare. Infants might be nursed by more than one woman. Older children might sleep in different places on different nights, drawn by friendship as much as by biology. Loyalty grows from countless acts of care. Food shared, wounds cleaned, fears soothed in the dark. In a world where survival is precarious, who is your family? May be answered as much by who has stood beside you, as by who shares your genes over many generations. Patterns would have emerged. Perhaps women usually moved at marriage, leaving the band they were born into, and joining another as wives, sisters-in-law, and eventually mothers and grandmothers. Perhaps men moved instead. Different human groups today follow different rules, and our Paleolithic ancestors could have done the same. What matters is that movement happened. People did not stay locked in one little knot of blood relatives forever. This steady trickle of newcomers did something important. It tied bands together into wider networks. Your band might camp one valley over from another, or hundreds of miles away, but you almost certainly have relatives there now, a sister who left seasons ago, a cousin who married into their group, a child given in adoption during a time of scarcity. When you meet them at a river crossing or a good flint source, you are not strangers. You are the people of so and so, connected by marriage, memory, and obligation. Within the band itself there is no throne, no formal council chamber, no written law. But there is still structure. Leadership, as far as we can tell, was likely soft and situational. A skilled hunter might be listened to on the morning of a difficult hunt. An older woman who has raised many children and seen many crises might carry great weight when it comes to deciding when to move camp or how to handle a conflict. Someone with an exceptional memory for landscapes, waterholes, plant stands, migration routes, might guide long movements between seasonal territories. Anthropologists call this acephalous organization, literally without a head. But that does not mean without order. Respect is earned and maintained through competence, generosity, and reliability. If someone boasts, hoards food, or bullies, others may tease them, ignore their suggestions, or in more serious cases, leave them behind when the band splits. In a group, this small reputation is everything. Disagreements still happen because humans are humans. Food is uneven. Hunts fail. A tool goes missing and is found by the wrong person. Someone's child hits someone else's child. Voices rise. In many modern foraging groups, sharp conflicts are often cooled not with punishments but with talk. Long, meandering conversations that may stretch into the night. Jokes that puncture anger. Elders who remind a group of past disasters faced together, of times when unity made the difference between life and death. Sometimes conflict is resolved by distance. A few families take their belongings and camp a short way off for a while. The band fissions into two smaller groups, each still connected by kinship and exchange. When tempers settle and resources demand cooperation again, they may fuse back together. This gentle rhythm, fission and fusion, splitting and rejoining, seems to have been a basic feature of human social life long before recorded history. Cooperation, though, is the rule rather than the exception. It has to be. Hunting large animals is dangerous, and often only succeeds when several people coordinate their efforts. Sharing meat spreads the risk of bad luck. Today you may come back empty-handed. Tomorrow another hunter might share with you. Gathering plants and small animals is also more efficient when knowledge is pooled. Which root is good this week? Which patch has already been stripped? Where the berries ripen earliest after the first rains? Childcare in such a setting is almost never the work of a single mother and child alone. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, and even unrelated adults may carry, comfort and watch infants and toddlers. Biologists call this cooperative breeding. It allows parents to hunt, gather, and travel more effectively. It may also have shaped our brains, making us particularly sensitive to faces, voices, and social cues from a very early age. Beyond your band there are others. The landscape is not empty. Neighbouring groups might share a language, or at least a related dialect. They might meet at predictable times of year, when certain resources are abundant, a salmon run, a mass flowering, a migration bottleneck. These gatherings are chances to trade raw materials, exchange mates, tell stories, and refresh alliances. They are also moments of risk, because any meeting between groups carries the possibility of misunderstanding, jealousy, or competition over the best spots. The archaeological record gives hints of this wider world. Stone from one quarry turning up hundreds of kilometres away. Shell beads far inland, similar tool styles appearing over huge regions. These patterns suggest that Paleolithic bands, like many modern foragers, lived in overlapping social circles, the intimate band, a wider ring of friendly groups, and beyond that more distant peoples known only by rumour and caution. Most of the time, the relationships between bands were probably pragmatic. When both groups were doing well, visits might be warm, with gifts, shared hunts, and new partnerships formed. In lean times, meetings might be tense, each side wary of the other's desperation. Violence between groups almost certainly occurred, but it is unlikely to have been constant, simply because war is costly for small populations. Losing even a few adults can cripple a band's ability to feed and protect its children. So your place in this world 100,000 years ago is double. You belong to a small, tightly knit cluster of people who know every scar on your body and every story of your life. And you are also a node in a much larger, looser web of kin and allies stretching across valleys, rivers, and generations. This web carries not just genes, but ideas, tools, songs, and memories. It is this layered social structure, intimate bands nested within wider networks, that will carry your kind through ice advances, droughts, and encounters with other human species. It is the quiet architecture beneath the morning's bustle, the unseen pattern that holds people together as they rise, work, argue, forgive, and sleep again under the same slowly turning sky. When night comes again, all of this social complexity has to fit somewhere. People need a place to lie down, to curl around children, to set tools where they will not be stepped on in the dark. For your ancestors, home was not a single fixed structure with walls and a roof that stood for decades. It was a shifting constellation of shelters, improvised over and over as the band moved through its seasonal rounds. Sometimes the land did most of the work. In many regions, 100,000 years ago, erosion had carved caves and rock overhangs into cliffs and hillsides. These ready-made shelters could be priceless. A deep cave might block wind, hold warmth, and offer relative safety from predators. A wide overhang could keep off rain and snow while still letting smoke drift out and light come in. Archaeologists find traces of this kind of living, thick layers of ash and charcoal laid down over thousands of years, fragments of tools and bones trodden into the floor, sometimes stacked in distinct horizons that show repeated occupation. But those layers do not necessarily mean a permanent village. More likely they record visits that came and went with the seasons, a favoured winter refuge, a stop along a migration route, a place families returned to because their grandparents and great-grandparents had once found safety there. Caves, though, were not always available or even desirable. Some were wet, cold, or full of dangerous animals. Others simply did not exist in flatter landscapes. Out on the open plains, in woodlands, or along riverbanks, your ancestors had to build their own shelter. Here, the evidence is thinner, because wood, leaves, and hides rot away. What remains on some Paleolithic sites are circles or arcs of post holes, stains in the soil where wooden stakes once stood, patterns of stones that might have weighted down the edges of hide walls, hearths, dark patches where fires burned again and again, sometimes ringed with heat-cracked rocks. These quiet marks in the ground suggest something very human. Makeshift homes assembled quickly from what was at hand. Imagine a simple hut, flexible poles cut from young trees driven into the soil and bent together to form a dome, branches woven between them, the whole frame covered with animal hides, bark or thick mats of grasses. At the base, stones or piles of earth anchoring the edges against the wind. At the centre, a shallow fire pit, its smoke filtering up through a small opening near the top. Structures like this have close parallels among many modern forager groups who still build temporary shelters. They can go up in an afternoon and be abandoned just as quickly when it is time to move on. In colder regions, the walls might be layered more thickly, gaps stuffed with moss or dry grass. In warmer climates, the covering might be lighter, prioritizing shade and airflow over insulation. Season-dictated design. In a wet, windy winter, people would likely cluster more tightly, densifying their camp. Huts close together, entrances angled away from prevailing winds, shared hearths burning through the long nights. Children and elders might sleep nearer the warmest spots, wrapped in the softest hides. Hunters and younger adults might take the draftier edges. In a dry summer, the camp could stretch out. Screes of branches might be raised simply to cast shade, open on all sides so breezes could pass through. People might sleep more in the open, under the sky, using shelters mainly as daytime refuges from sun and insects. Hearths might be smaller, used briefly for cooking rather than long-lasting warmth. Within the camp, space itself was likely organised by social rules, even if there were no written maps. The hearth at the centre of a shelter might belong to a particular household, perhaps an older woman, her children, and whoever had joined their orbit. Around that fire, tools, baskets and sleeping places would accumulate in a pattern that everyone recognised. Another fire a short distance away might anchor a different cluster of kin. Paths worn into the ground would mark common routes between them, where food was shared, where gossip flowed, where disputes were quietly settled. There may have been zones that were loosely public and others more private. A slightly open area near the edge of the camp where meat was butchered, skins scraped, bones cracked for marrow. Another space where children usually played, imitating adults with toy versions of tools. Perhaps a corner a little apart where the sick were tended or where certain tasks with ritual importance, painting bodies, preparing burial goods, were carried out with more care and quiet. All of this is inferred, not seen directly. Archaeologists work with scattered clues, clusters of stone flakes suggesting where tools were made, concentrations of animal bones hinting at butchering sites, ash lenses that show where fires burned hot and often. From these fragments they propose models of Paleolithic camps, but there is room for many possibilities. We also do not know how often people chose caves over open camps, or how preferences varied between different human species and regions. Some bands may have favoured rock shelters whenever they were available. Others might have preferred the flexibility of light structures they could abandon without regret. Seasonal patterns could shift over centuries as climates warmed or cooled, as herds changed their routes, as neighbours claimed or relinquished territories. What seems consistent is not a particular building style, but an attitude. Shelter as something you create in dialogue with the land. You read the wind, the slope, the nearest water, the signs of predators. You notice whether last year's camp still smells of smoke, whether there is deadfall wood nearby, whether the rock overhang drips after rain. You remember where your grandparents once slept? Where a child recovered from an illness? Where a winter passed without tragedy? Those memories guide where you set down your bundle, where you press a stake into the soil, where you lay the first branch. For your Paleolithic ancestors, home was less a fixed address and more a practice, repeated again and again, choosing a good spot, shaping a little pocket of safety out of hides and branches and stone, curling around the fire with the same familiar faces, listening as the night wind moves around the camp, and the world beyond remains vast, changeable, and only partially known. In the middle of all this, one thing matters so much that everything else bends around it: fire. If the shelter is the body of the camp, the fire is its heartbeat. You can pull up the stakes of a hut in minutes, but the coals of a hearth are something you guard with your life. By 100,000 years ago, your ancestors were almost certainly not beginners at this. Evidence of controlled fire goes back much further, charred bones and ash layers from sites, hundreds of thousands of years older, even hints from 1,000,000 years ago. But archaeologists still argue about what those traces really mean. Was that fire carefully tended by humans, or the remains of a natural brush blaze that animals and people happened to use? Were our ancestors true fire masters, or clever fire borrowers, taking advantage of flames they did not yet know how to reliably create? By the time of your imagined night, those debates shrink into the background hum of deep time. What matters to you, here and now, is simple. There is a hearth. There is heat, and keeping it alive is everyone's quiet priority. We do not know exactly when humans first learned to make fire on demand, rather than just preserving it. Some researchers think regular fire starting might be relatively recent in evolutionary terms, perhaps within the last couple 100,000 years. Others argue it must be older, hidden in archaeological gaps where ash and charcoal fail to survive. Either way, for people living 100,000 years ago, the safest strategy is not to test their luck. You try very hard not to let the fire die. In the depths of the hearth, under the white and grey ash, glowing embers lie like buried suns. At night, someone checks them. A foot nudges a charred log closer. A stick stirs the coals to bring a faint red back to life. A small armful of dry twigs is laid nearby, so that when the first person wakes before dawn, they can coax a quick flame without leaving the shelter. All of this sounds simple, but it represents a long chain of knowledge. Which woods spark easily and which smoulder. How to stack branches so air can move and feed the flame. How to bank a fire at night, pulling in ash, arranging half-burnt logs, so it does not flare too high and burn out, or sink so low that it cools into dead charcoal. If the worst happens and the last ember fades, there are possibilities, none of them easy. Some bands may already know how to strike sparks from stone and iron-rich minerals, using a sharp blow to shower tiny, short-lived stars onto a bed of tinder. Others might use friction, spinning a dry stick in a wooden socket, or sawing one piece against another until a brown curl of wood dust begins to smoke. Ethnographers who have watched such methods in recent forager societies note that it can take minutes of steady work, practiced hands and the right materials. In wind, in damp conditions, it is harder still, so your ancestors may hedge their bets. A smouldering brand can be carried from camp to camp, protected like a fragile child, wrapped in damp bark, tucked in a container of ash, or blown gently now and then to keep it barely alive. When a band moves through its seasonal round, the person responsible for this living coal might walk near the centre of the group, shielded from rain and sudden accidents. Losing that ember does not just mean a cold night. It means more time and energy spent on risky fire-making, at the exact moment when you are already tired and hungry from travel. When the flame is there, though, everything about life changes. At the simplest level, fire is warmth. On a cold Pleistocene night, with temperatures dropping hard after sunset, the difference between a fire and none could be the difference between a child shivering through till morning or quietly slipping away in their sleep. Bodies can huddle together, but heat seeps out quickly into the immense dark. A small blaze turns the air around it into a bubble of survivable climate. Hands thaw, wet hides steam and dry. Frozen ground softens just enough to be bearable. Fire is also a wall. Many large predators fear flame, or at least hesitate to cross a bright, flickering barrier. A ring of hearths at the edge of a camp does not guarantee safety, but it tips the odds. The glow pushes back the range at which eyeshine appears. The smell of smoke settles into hair, skin, and clothing, confusing the scent trails that hunters use. Your ancestors may not have thought of this in abstract terms, but they knew which campsites felt safer, and those were the ones where the fire burned hot and long. Around the fire, something else happens that is harder to see in bones and stones, but just as real. People gather. The tasks of the day, hunting, digging, carrying, scraping, tend to scatter individuals across the landscape. But when dusk comes and the flames begin to stand out against the dark, there is a natural pulling inward. Children drift toward the light. Elders choose a spot where their joints can warm. Hunters come back from the edges of the territory and drop their burdens close enough to feel heat, but not scorch. Stories, advice, small jokes, and remembered warnings flow more easily here than in the open, silent cold. Anthropologists sometimes describe this as fire extending the day. It creates a pocket of usable time after sunset, when predators are less bold, but the band is still awake. In that extra time, knowledge moves. A teenager watches an older woman twist fibers into cord by firelight, sees exactly how her thumbs press and roll. A hunter reenacts the movements of a chase, using a stick in the dirt to show where a wounded animal doubled back. A grandparent reaches for a child's hand and traces scars on their own skin, telling how each one was made and what was learned. Fire also transforms food. Raw meat and tough plant fibers can sustain life, but cooked food changes the equation. Heat makes many roots, tubers, and seeds more digestible. It softens connective tissue in meat, unlocks calories that would otherwise pass through unclaimed, and kills many of the parasites and pathogens that cling to flesh. Over thousands of generations, this may have helped fuel the energy-hungry brains that define our lineage. For your ancestors, the immediate effects are more tangible. The smell of roasting fat, the way a strip of once chewy meat becomes easier to tear with worn teeth, the comfort of a warm meal settling into an empty stomach on a cold night. Certain foods that would be bitter or even mildly toxic when raw might become safe when thoroughly roasted or leached and then heated. People learn through trial and error which plants to place by the coals until their harshness fades, which bones to crack after fire has made the marrow more fluid. Over time, cooking becomes a kind of quiet technology, layered on top of the flame itself. Stones are heated and dropped into water-filled pits to boil soups. Meat is smoked on racks to last through lean weeks. Embers are raked out carefully to create zones of different temperature, each suited to a different task: quick searing, slow roasting, gentle drying. Archaeologists can see some of this in the patterns of burned bone, in hearths rebuilt again and again in the same place, in microscopic changes to soil where fires burned hot enough to alter mineral structures. But much remains invisible: the particular taste of a favourite roasted root, the way someone tilted their head just so to blow on embers without showering sparks, the unspoken understanding that the fire at the centre of camp was, in a sense, part of the family. By 100,000 years ago, mastery of fire is not just a trick. It is woven into everything: where people choose to sleep, how far they can safely wander from shelter, what foods they can eat, how long they can sit together and talk. It bends the rhythm of the day and softens the edges of the night. Tomorrow, as dawn stretches over the landscape and the coals are stirred back into flame, that same fire will shape something else just as fundamental: the hunt. In the grey light before sunrise, while the fire is still mostly coals, the shape of the day begins to tilt toward danger. Not everyone will hunt. The very youngest, the very oldest, the injured, and those deep into pregnancy will likely stay near camp, where gathering, mending and tending take over. But a few people, sometimes mostly men, sometimes a mix, depending on the group and the season, are already thinking past the circle of warmth, out toward hoofprints, scents on the wind, and the promise of meat. By 100,000 years ago, their hands are not empty. The simplest and most important weapon is still the spear. A straightened wooden shaft, hardened in fire, tipped with a carefully shaped stone point, or a sharpened and polished piece of bone. Archaeologists find these points scattered across Africa and Eurasia, triangular, leaf-shaped, sometimes with tiny flakes removed along the edges to create a razor of stone. They show impact damage that suggests they were not just knives for butchering, but true hunting weapons, driven with force into living bodies. Most of these spears are probably thrusting spears meant to be used at close range. Some groups may already be experimenting with throwing spears, arcing them through the air toward a fleeing animal. There are hints of lighter projectiles in the archaeological record, but the really long-range technologies, bows, spear throwers, finely balanced darts, likely come later. For your imagined day, the hunt still means closing distance, stepping into the animal's space, and trusting that coordination and courage will outweigh fear. A spear alone is not enough. Hunters carry stone knives for finishing a kill or cutting bonds of sinew. They may have simple clubs or heavy digging sticks that can double as weapons. Some groups perhaps use wooden or bone points smeared with plant saps that irritate or weaken, though firm evidence for complex poisons appears much later. Still, the basic idea is there: extend the body with tools, make teeth where there are none, claws where fingers used to reach. With these in hand, the real hunting technology begins: cooperation. For large animals, what we might call big game, the hunt is rarely a solo act. A single human, even strong and determined, is fragile next to a wild bovine or a charging pig. But 10 humans or 15, thinking together, can turn the landscape itself into a weapon. One strategy is the drive. A few hunters circle wide, moving quietly with the wind in their faces so their scent does not carry. They position themselves where they can be seen and heard by the animals, but with escape paths leading in only one direction, toward a ravine, a marshy basin, a narrow pass between rocks, or a line of hidden companions with spears ready. At a signal, a shout, a wave, a sudden rush, the drivers show themselves fully. They yell, clap, throw stones, break branches. The startled herd or small group of animals flees along the path of least resistance, funneled by fear and terrain into the ambush. There, other hunters step from cover and thrust, or they push the animals into even worse trouble, a steep drop, a mud trap, a place where broken legs and exhaustion finish the work that sharp stone began. Another possibility is the persistent hunt. Certain animals, especially in hot climates, cannot cool themselves as efficiently as humans can. A small group of hunters can follow a chosen target for hours, maybe all day, using their long strides and sweat-cooled skin to wear it down. Each time the animal stops to rest or drink, the hunters appear again, forcing it to flee. Eventually, if the tracking is skilled and the day is hot, the animal may collapse from heat and exhaustion, too weak to stand. Imagination can fill in the sounds, the steady rhythm of footsteps, the soft murmur of voices deciding which hoofprint is freshest, the heavy breathing of the prey as it stumbles away again and again. Which animals are worth this effort? It varies by region, climate, and season, but some patterns appear again and again in sites from around this time. Large grazing animals are prize targets, ancient forms of antelope, wild cattle, buffalo, and other hoofed mammals carry huge amounts of meat, fat, and marrow. Even a single large carcass, properly butchered, can feed a band for days, especially if the weather is cool enough to slow decay, or if some meat can be smoked and dried near the campfire. Medium-sized animals, wild pigs, deer, smaller antelopes are also important. They are dangerous in their own ways. A cornered boar can rip a leg open with its tusks. A wounded deer can kick hard enough to break bone. But their size makes them more manageable to transport and process. Smaller game, hares, birds, reptiles are frequently taken too, probably with traps, throwing sticks or by hand. These leave subtler traces in the record, fragile bones easy to miss. But for a hungry family, a cluster of small animals can be just as critical as one dramatic kill. Every choice carries risk. Closing with a large animal means stepping into a zone where one mistake can change a life. A spear that glances off a rib instead of piercing the lungs, a rock that slips underfoot at the wrong second, a misjudged charge. These can end in shattered legs, crushed ribs, deep goring wounds. Some of the healed fractures and twisted bones seen in ancient skeletons may come from moments like this, when the line between hunter and hunted briefly blurred. Even without dramatic injury, the hunt wears on the body. Long distances walked at speed, sometimes in heat, sometimes over jagged rock or sucking mud. Muscles torn and pulled, joints ground down by countless crouches, leaps, and sudden turns. Teeth clenched against the urge to cough or sneeze at the wrong moment in an ambush. Nerves stretched thin while waiting, listening, smelling the animal before it appears. To survive this, hunters rely not only on courage, but on an intimate reading of the world. Tracking is more than just following footprints. It is noticing the way a blade of grass bends, the freshness of a broken twig, the faint sour tang of sweat on the air. It is remembering where herds usually cross a river in late dry season, which gully holds shade long enough for animals to rest at midday, where the wind tends to shift in the afternoon. Parents begin teaching these skills early, pointing out tracks to children, asking them to guess how long ago the animal passed, what direction it was moving, whether it was walking calmly or running in alarm. Over years, this becomes a kind of second eyesight. An experienced tracker can stand on a ridge, scan a valley, and quietly rule out half a dozen possible routes without needing to try them. All of this raises another question that researchers still debate: who hunts? Among many recent hunter-gatherer societies, men tend to take the lead in large game hunting, while women focus more on gathering plant foods, small animals, and sometimes fishing. This pattern, combined with skeletal evidence suggesting differences in activity between male and female bodies, has led to the traditional image of male hunters, female gatherers. But the deeper story is probably more flexible. Some archaeological finds hint that women may have participated in big game hunting more often than once believed, especially in smaller groups where every strong adult body mattered. In some environments, cooperative drives might include almost everyone capable of running and shouting, not just those usually labelled hunters. Pregnancy and childcare would shape who could take part at any given moment, but over a lifetime, many individuals might move in and out of hunting roles. Rather than a rigid rule, it may be better to imagine tendencies. A tendency for certain people, often but not always men, to invest more heavily in the skills and risks of big game. A tendency for others, often but not always women, to become experts in plants, small animals, and the quiet, constant work that keeps everyone alive between dramatic kills. What is clear is that hunting, however divided, ties the fate of the band to the wider world. Every successful kill depends on reading landscapes, seasons, animal behaviour, and the moods of weather. Every scar tells a story of risk accepted for the sake of shared food. When the hunters return to the fire, heavy with meat or empty-handed, they bring with them not just calories but news, where the herds have moved, which waterholes are drying, where predators have been seen. Tomorrow's plans will take all of that into account, because while the hunt is sharp and sudden, something else is quieter, slower, and just as vital: the gathering that fills the spaces between spears. When the hunters fade into the distance, the camp does not fall silent. It turns inward. Around the embers, another kind of planning begins. It is less dramatic, less likely to leave broken bones and impact scars on stone tips, but in terms of pure survival, it may matter even more, because meat is a windfall, plants are the weather. Over thousands of days and nights, it is roots, seeds, fruits, leaves and bark that keep bodies from collapsing between kills. In many modern hunter-gatherer groups, studies suggest that plant foods often make up half or more of the total calories eaten in a year, sometimes far more in lean times. It would not be surprising if something similar held 100,000 years ago. To make that work, someone has to know the land like a living library. Imagine the sheer breadth of knowledge required. You need to recognize hundreds of plant species, not just at their most obvious ripe fruit glowing in the canopy, but as tiny sprouts, as dry stalks in the wind, as half-withered leaves after a frost. You must know which roots are safe only after long roasting, which nuts become deadly if stored damp, which berries look inviting but bring vomiting, paralysis, or worse. You keep a mental calendar of taste. Early in the wet season, this valley might offer tender shoots and mushrooms after the first rains. A month later, a different slope, with a different angle to the sun, will be rich in grains or seed heads. Certain tubers can be dug nearly year-round, but only reach their fullest starch when a particular tree flowers, or when a certain bird begins to call at dusk. Seasonal knowledge is layered on top of local knowledge. One valley may hold bitter, fibrous roots that are barely worth the effort. Another, a day's walk away, hides thick, sweet tubers that can feed a family for days. One stand of palms drops fruit that ferments quickly and attracts dangerous animals. Another, slightly higher on the ridge, offers a slower, more reliable harvest. All of this is information. All of it needs to be remembered. Tools help make it real. A digging stick is simple but precious. A straight branch, hardened and sometimes fire-charred at the tip, maybe with a slight point chipped by stone. In the hands of a practiced gatherer, it becomes a lever that can pry up heavy roots, crack open termite mounds, and break the crust of hard soil after drought. Wear patterns on some ancient wooden fragments and bone suggest just this kind of repeated levering and prying. Baskets, woven bags, or animal skin slings, most of which do not survive in the archaeological record, would have been nearly constant companions. They free the hands, allow small foods to accumulate into meaningful meals. Grinding stones, where we do find them, tell another part of the story. Plant foods being crushed, pounded, milled into pastes and flours. Even 100,000 years ago in some regions, there are hints of starch grains trapped in stone tools, residues that look suspiciously like the ghosts of wild grass seeds and underground storage organs. Processing turns borderline foods into staples. Some seeds must be parched to crack their shells. Some roots have to be sliced and soaked to leach out toxins before they are roasted. Certain nuts demand pounding, then washing, then drying, an afternoon of steady rhythm before they surrender their safe calories. This is not casual work. It is technique, often repeated, refined, shared. Who carries most of this knowledge? Many anthropologists argue that in a lot of early human groups, women likely sat at the centre of this web. The reasoning is cautious but compelling. In recent foraging societies, women frequently specialize in gathering. Their daily work requires detailed, mapped in-the-body awareness of plant cycles, small animal burrows, insect nests, and temporary water. Studies have shown that their plant harvests are often more predictable than the men's hunting returns. In skeletal remains from the Paleolithic, patterns of repetitive strain on certain bones sometimes suggest long hours of grinding, pounding, or carrying loads, activities often associated with plant processing and transport. This does not mean men never gathered, or that women never hunted. Life on the edge of subsistence rarely allows for rigid categories, but it may mean that over a lifetime, many women became encyclopedias of the edible world. They would know which plants soothe a fever and which bring on miscarriage, which leaves can line a cooking pit without poisoning the food, which bitter barks help ease a toothache or calm a sour stomach. Even today, some of the most sophisticated plant medicine traditions on the planet are kept largely by women. It is plausible that deep roots of that pattern reach back into times like this. Children are folded into this education from their first tottering steps. A toddler walks beside a mother, aunt, or grandmother, watching hands move from plant to basket, from ground to mouth. Someone names things softly over and over, building a vocabulary linked not just to shapes and colours, but to smells, textures, aftertastes. Safe, dangerous, only a little, only after the first frost. Never with an empty stomach. Games disguise lessons. A child is asked, which one of these leaves did we cook last moon? Where did we find the sweet fruit when the river was low? If they point wrong, a gentle correction. If they point right, praise, a bite, inclusion. By adolescence, the knowledge is no longer just memorized, it is lived, felt in the body, seated in experience. Sometimes this foraging happens near camp, among familiar shrubs and trees. Other times, groups may leave for hours, even most of a day, fanning out along known paths. Quiet conversations carry subtle negotiations. Who will go to the marsh for reeds and edible rhizomes? Who will climb for fruits where leopards sometimes wait? Who will dig where snakes may sleep under the soil? The risks are different from those of the hunt, but still real. A misjudged plant, a hidden thorn, a nest of stinging insects, an unseen predator. Yet the work continues day after day, because it must, even when the hunters return with success, even when meat drips over the fire. Seeds and roots and greens slip into the pot, round out the meal, smooth the spikes of feast and famine. Over generations, this quiet labour shapes more than diets. It creates mental maps of landscapes that can be carried in memory for a lifetime, passed on in stories, songs, and the simple act of placing a child's hand on the right plant at the right moment. Without that, without the gathering, without the mostly invisible expertise that knows the difference between nourishment and poison, no number of spears would be enough. With it, the band can do something remarkable, begin to think beyond today's hunger and toward tomorrow's fire, tomorrow's paths, and the seasons still to come. If you could step into the camp now, late in the day, and listen not to the words but to the sounds of eating, you would hear the entire ecology of their world in that small circle. There is the tearing of meat, yes, but also the crunch of charred seeds, the soft suck of marrow, the quiet scraping as someone uses a flake of stone to lift roasted tuber from its skin. A child gnaws on something that looks like a twig, but is really a strip of roasted root. Someone else cracks open an insect carapace with practiced fingers. The Paleolithic diet was not a single menu. It was a moving target, a constantly shifting balance between whatever the land and water would give. Some bands leaned heavily on meat, especially in open grasslands where large herd animals were common. Isotopic analyses of bones from some ancient humans suggest a protein intake that at first glance looks almost like a top predator's, values similar to wolves or big cats. In other regions and times, especially where plant life was rich and varied, those same chemical signatures tilt toward a more mixed diet, with plants, small animals, and perhaps fish all leaving their faint traces in the bone. Teeth tell another part of the story. Under a microscope, the enamel of fossilized teeth carries tiny scratches and pits, microscopic wear that reflects a lifetime's chewing. Broad, complex wear patterns hint at tough plants, grit from grinding stones and fibrous roots. Straighter, more uniform scratches line up with meat slicing across the teeth. In some Neanderthal remains from forested Europe, residues trapped in dental plaque include starch grains from wild cereals and legumes, evidence that even these formidable hunters were chewing more than just flesh. Taken together, the picture that emerges is of remarkable flexibility. Meat, plants, fish, shellfish, insects, even bones themselves, cracked for marrow and crushed for the greasy, nutrient-rich tissue inside. How these foods were eaten changed dramatically with one simple technology: fire. Raw food is hard on the body. Cooking softens fibers, breaks down toxins, and unlocks calories that teeth and gut alone cannot easily reach. Over long spans of time, this may have helped support larger brains and lighter jaws, but for the people around this fire, the benefits are immediate and obvious. Roasted meat keeps longer than raw. Boiled roots are easier for children and elders to chew. Bitter greens mellow when wilted over heat. The kitchen here is not a room with walls. It is a zone of activity around the flames. One person tends skewers of meat propped over coals. Another buries wrapped bundles of tubers in a shallow pit lined with hot stones, covering them with earth to bake slowly. In some places and periods, stone boiling may have been used, heating rocks in the fire, then dropping them into a hide or bark container filled with water and food, bringing the mixture to a simmer without cracking the vessel. Fat drips, sizzles and flares. Someone carefully places bone ends near the edge of the heat, encouraging the marrow to loosen. If there is access to a river or coastline, fish may be laid on embers or smoked gently over a lower, cooler fire, the first experiments in preservation beginning almost by accident. Because if hunting is uncertain and plant harvests are seasonal, then any way of stretching today's food into tomorrow's security becomes precious. Preservation at this time is probably simple but meaningful. Meat might be cut into thin strips and dried in sun and smoke, especially in colder, drier climates where spoilage is slower. Fat can be rendered by slow heating, then stored in skins or scraped onto dried meat, creating portable high-energy rations. Underground caches, food wrapped in leaves or hide and buried in cool soil or snow, may have kept valuable pieces safe from scavengers, at least for a while. In wetter, warmer regions, storage is harder. Here, the emphasis may fall more on constant movement and knowledge of staggered resources than on keeping food for long. Certain nuts and seeds, once dried, can last weeks or months. Some roots will sit quietly in the ground, alive but dormant, a living pantry to be dug when needed. Across continents, regional variation shapes everything. A band on a temperate coastline might gorge on shellfish, fish, seaweed, and the occasional stranded whale, their bones and teeth recording a life rich in marine protein. Far inland, another group may depend on migratory ungulates, wild grains, and hardy tubers that survive frost. High-altitude populations lean on cold-adapted plants, marmots, mountain goats. In tropical forests, small game, fruiting trees and insects fill the gaps left by elusive large animals. Diet is not just about survival in the narrow sense. It shapes bodies, energy, and odds of thriving. Children raised with enough fat and protein grow taller, stronger, more resilient to disease. Periods of scarcity leave marks in bone growth, in enamel defects on teeth, in stunted limbs. Groups with reliable access to dense energy sources, marrow, brain tissue, fatty fish, calorie-rich nuts, may find their days slightly less defined by gnawing hunger, slightly more open to learning, to play, to remembering details about the world. Around this fire, the first kitchens are not about recipes. They are about strategy. What can be eaten safely? How can it be made more digestible, more portable, more shareable? Which parts must be eaten now before they spoil, and which can be saved for the leaner walk ahead? Every decision made in this circle echoes into the next day's strength, the next week's journey, the next generation's chances. And as the band eats, talks softly, and licks grease from their fingers, they are doing more than filling stomachs. They are refining a way of living with landscapes that will carry their descendants across continents and through ice and drought. Tomorrow, the tools that make this possible will come into focus, the stones and bones that turn bare hands into a toolkit as varied as the diet it helps create. By morning light, before the sun has burned the chill out of the air, the camp is already busy with something quiet but essential, making and mending the tools that make yesterday's meal and tomorrow's possible. In your hand, if you lived here, there would almost always be stone. It might be a simple flake, small enough to hide in a child's fist, edges bright and sharp where it has just been struck from a larger core. It might be a thicker piece, one side flat, the other carefully shaped into a line of tiny ridges where each blow has removed a chip. To a tired modern eye, these can look like random broken rocks. To the people using them, they are as distinct as forks and knives and screwdrivers. The basic principle is deceptively simple. Take a stone that breaks with a predictable pattern, flint, shirt, obsidian, quartzite. Strike it with another rock or press against it with a bone or antler. Use the angles and the natural planes to control how flakes come off. But within that simplicity lives a world of technique. Some tools are made by what archaeologists call hard hammer percussion, hitting stone with stone, strong blows that detach thick flakes. Others are refined with softer materials, antler, bone, or dense wood, allowing more precise control. A skilled knapper can see, in the curve of a core, exactly where to place the next strike, so that the flake that comes off will have the right length, the right thickness, the right curve for scraping hide or cutting meat. You can imagine the different categories spread out around the fire. There are long, thin blades, struck from carefully prepared cores, good for cutting flesh, slicing plant fibers, trimming wood, There are heavy scrapers with a strong, duller edge for working hides, removing fat and membrane to turn stiff skin into something that will later become clothing or shelter. There are points, leaf-shaped, triangular or more irregular, destined to become spear tips, backed blades, barbs for hunting tools. Earlier in human history, these might have been simpler, chunky choppers, hand axes held directly in the fist. By 100,000 years ago in many regions, technique has become more elaborate. Some groups use prepared core methods, shaping the central stone in advance, so multiple standardized flakes can be removed in sequence. This is planning several steps ahead, holding in mind not just the blow you're about to make, but the tools you intend to make 3, 4, 5 strikes from now. Stone is only part of the story. Much of the toolkit is perishable, and so it rarely survives, but its ghost remains in the way stone pieces are shaped. A sharp flake with a flat base may have been set into a wooden shaft, glued with plant resins and bound with sinew. A long, slender point, carefully thinned near the base, almost begs to be hafted as a spear or dart. Bone and antler provide light, strong, workable material for awls, needles, barbed points, wedges and handles. Picture someone working a long bone from a hunted animal. First, it is cracked for marrow, because calories come before technology. Later, the remaining shaft is split, ground, and scraped into a smooth, narrow tool perfect for piercing leather. Another person may be chewing strips of dried sinew to soften them, turning tendon into cord. Elsewhere, someone trims a straight length of wood, testing the flex, rotating it in their hands, shaving it with stone flakes until it becomes a serviceable spear or digging stick. Antler, shed each year by deer or other animals, is especially valuable. Tough and slightly elastic, it can be shaped into points that survive impacts better than brittle stone alone. It also serves as a perfect intermediate tool, used to press tiny flakes from a stone edge in a process known as pressure flaking. That fine retouch, the small regular scallops along a tool's margin, is a signature not just of manual skill, but of a mind that understands cause and effect in detail. Tool complexity mirrors mental and social complexity. To teach someone how to strike stone properly is not as simple as handing them a rock. It involves demonstrating angles, force, the feel of the right blow. It involves warnings about fractures that will travel the wrong way, cores that will shatter. This kind of learning is usually long and patient, passed from elders to adolescents, from parent to child, from skilled specialist to curious observer. Where tools are standardized across hundreds of miles as they sometimes are, it suggests something beyond individual genius. It suggests that groups are sharing ideas, imitating each other, perhaps even travelling specifically to exchange knowledge and raw materials. A point made in one valley looks almost identical to a point made in another, far away. This is culture, not just instinct. And yet, there is no single global toolkit. In one region, people may favour wide scrapers and robust points, embedded in heavy wooden thrusting spears, suited for close-range hunting of large animals. In another, smaller, more delicate flakes dominate, perhaps used in combination with throwing spears or complex composite tools. Along coastlines, stone implements may be shaped for opening shells, scaling fish, cutting plant fibres for nets and lines. In cold climates, bone and antler tools often flourish, supplying barbed points for fishing, finely made needles for stitching tight, insulating clothing. Over tens of thousands of years, fashions in stone and bone rise and fall. What archaeologists call industries or traditions appear in the record. Middle Stone Age points in Africa, Mousterian tools in Neanderthal Europe, other regional complexes in Asia. They are not companies or factories, but shared habits of making, doing and thinking, each adapted to particular landscapes and needs. For the people using them, tools are not disposable objects. They are companions. A good core of knappable stone carried for weeks may provide many flakes as needed, its shape evolving over time. A favourite scraper, resharpened again and again, becomes smaller, thinner, its life history written in the pattern of its scars. Broken spear points are recycled, snapped ends retouched into new cutting edges, damaged bases ground away and reshaped. Little goes to waste when every piece has cost time, energy, and risk to acquire. Knowledge of maintenance is as important as knowledge of manufacture. Edges must be resharpened before they dull too much. Hafting bindings must be checked, tightened, replaced. Glue must be reheated and reinforced. Around the evening fire, after the day's tasks are done, you can imagine people turning their tools over in their hands, feeling for nicks, planning tomorrow's repairs. Children watch, absorbing not just how to use a knife or point, but how to keep it alive. Some tools, especially those that took exceptional effort or required especially fine raw material, may even outlast their original owners, passed from parent to child. From one member of the band to another, they carry memory. This flake came from the far hills, when the group travelled to the big water. This point was made by a grandfather's hand. Stories attach themselves to stone and bone, turning tools into threads that tie individuals to a shared past. If this world of edges and points and polished bone stirs your curiosity, and you find yourself wanting to wander further into these deep prehistoric rooms, there is a quiet place waiting for you beyond this story. Our book, with more slow, detailed journeys into early human life, rests at sleepytimehistory.com, with a gentle discount available this week for anyone who feels like exploring a little deeper. For now, in the soft light of this imagined morning, the toolkit is ready. Stones that remember the blows that shaped them, bones that have moved from living bodies to living hands, wooden shafts smoothed by fingers and use. With these, your Paleolithic ancestors extend their reach, sharpen their chances, and carve a little security out of a world that offers nothing for free. Soon those same tools will turn toward the body itself, toward clothing, shelters, and crafts that keep cold and wind at bay. Cold is not just a number on a thermometer here. It is a presence. It presses through the night, slides along the ground at dawn, waits in the shadows of rocks and trees. A bare human body, even a tough and seasoned one, can only endure so much of it. Skin alone is not enough. So the tools you've just imagined around the fire, the scrapers, awls and bone points, are already tugged toward their next task, building a second skin. We do not have their parkas and boots lying neatly preserved in museum drawers from 100,000 years ago. Organic things rot, mould, are eaten, returned to soil. Most clothing vanishes long before it can fossilize. What we have instead are hints and shadows, scraper edges worn smooth in ways that match hide working, bones shaped into awls and, later, needles, chemical traces on stone that suggest contact with fat and skin. Together, these fragments whisper a quiet but persistent message. They wrapped themselves against the cold. Imagine the process starting right after a hunt. When the meat is cut away, the hide remains, heavy, wet, stiff. Left alone, it will dry into something like rigid board, useful perhaps as a windbreak, but not as clothing. To make it supple, the people of your band need time, patience, and a practiced sequence of steps that have been perfected over thousands of years. First comes scraping, those broad, sturdy tools you saw by the fire move across the inside of the hide, pushing away clinging fat and stringy membrane. The work is rhythmic, more like rubbing than chopping. Too gentle, and the tissue remains, inviting rot. Too forceful, and the skin tears, weakening what could become a warm cloak. The right touch is learned by feel. Then comes softening. Different groups likely use different methods, but many involve fat, smoke, or even the animal's own brain. Brain tissue is rich in oils and emulsifiers, and there is an old saying among traditional tanners in recent centuries, every animal has enough brain to tan its own hide. When archaeologists find stones and bones stained and polished in particular ways, they see the echo of such work. Perhaps your ancestors warmed brains and fat in a hide bag, then massaged the mixture into the skin, working it into every fibre with their hands, their feet, even with chewed pieces of bone acting as improvised rollers. After that, drying and smoking. A hide is stretched tight on a frame of poles or pegged to the ground, held under gentle tension so it dries flat and open instead of shrivelling. As it dries, it is worked, twisted, pulled, kneaded, keeping the fibres from locking into stiffness. Smoke from a low, smouldering fire may bathe it for hours. The compounds in wood smoke help preserve and waterproof the skin, and the scent lingers, a moving memory of the hearth, carried on the body into wind and snow. From these treated hides clothing is cut. In the earliest forms it might be simple, a cape tied with a thong, a wraparound skirt, a sleeveless tunic belted at the waist. But complexity grows over time, especially where winters bite harder. In colder latitudes and higher altitudes, archaeologists infer more tailored garments from the presence of specialized tools. Thin polished bone awls and, later, true needles with eyes drilled through their tips suggest stitching, not just tying or wrapping. With a needle, you can join edges with tight, overlapping seams, trapping air, shedding wind, building boots, mittens, hoods. Even without preserved coats, the bodies that once wore them tell a story. Neanderthal skeletons in Ice Age Europe, for example, show limb proportions and nasal structures suited to severe cold, but not enough to sleep naked in a blizzard. For them to live, hunt and raise children through long glacial winters, layered, well-fitted clothing is not a luxury. It is an unrecorded but almost certain companion. Clothing changes with the world around you. On a warm savanna afternoon, you might strip down to a simple belt of hide, holding a stone knife and a few pouches. At night, when the sky clears and heat rushes away into space, you add layers, a draped skin over the shoulders, a wrapped skirt or leggings, maybe soft inner furs turned with the hair toward your skin, and tougher outer hides with the hair facing out, catching snow and rain. In wetter regions, more attention might go to shedding water, oily skins, smoked carefully, overlapping capes that channel rain away from the body. In thorny scrublands, harder outer coverings protect against scratches and insect bites. At high altitudes, where wind is the real enemy, people likely favoured snug sleeves, close-fitting hoods, bindings at wrists and ankles to seal in warm air. But clothing is never just a shield against the elements. Even in simple societies, what you wear can say who you are. We see faint traces of this in beads made from shells or teeth, in pierced animal claws that may have hung from cords at the throat or wrist. Some groups, even long before 100,000 years ago, seem to have used ochre and other pigments, perhaps on skin, perhaps on hair, perhaps on clothing. A strip of hide dyed red, a fringe of cut leather decorated with teeth, a sewn line of shells around the edge of a cloak. These would speak of group belonging, of skill, of experience. A child's first small wrap might be decorated differently from the heavy cloak of an accomplished hunter. Certain patterns of cuts, or particular types of fur could be reserved for elders, or for those who had taken part in dangerous hunts. In this way, clothing becomes a moving story, visible at a glance, broadcasting age, role and affiliation, without a word. Beneath all of this, more fleeting crafts support the visible garments. To lace hides together, you need cord. Some of it is made from sinew, tendon fibers dried, pounded, split, and twisted into strong thread. But there is growing evidence that even very early humans also twisted plant fibers into string. Simple cordage leaves almost no trace unless conditions are perfect, but impressions of woven or twisted fibers pressed accidentally into clay, and microscopic wear on certain stone tools hint at a hidden world of string and rope. With string, possibilities bloom. You can tie clothing more securely, hang tools from belts, make belts themselves. Thin, twisted cords may become necklaces, thicker ones become carrying straps, bindings for spear points, maybe even the first nets and slings. From a distance, a person might just seem wrapped in hides. Up close, their gear could be a web of knots, loops, and cords, every twist the result of knowledge passed down one careful demonstration at a time. Some researchers have suggested that by this period, people might even have begun weaving simple mats or bags, or braiding headbands and belts. The direct evidence is scarce. Time is not kind to grass and fibre, but the cognitive leap required to take individual strands and organise them into ordered patterns is the same one already visible in stone tools and social structures. It would not be surprising if, around a quiet afternoon fire, fingers that once shaped flakes also toyed with fibres, learning how they behave, how they can be made to obey. In the stillness of a Paleolithic evening, the camp is ringed not only by stone and bone, but by these softer creations. Cloaks airing by the fire, damp boots turned inside out to dry, cords coiled like sleeping snakes, rolled hides waiting to be worked. Clothing here is not fashion in the modern sense. It is technology, memory, and identity layered directly onto the body. When you imagine lying down to sleep in that world, imagine also the weight and smell of those furs, the rough soft feel of smoked leather against your cheek, the faint tangle of smoke and animal and earth. They are your blanket, your armour, and your flag all at once. Wrapped in them, your ancestors met the cold night and survived it. Under those layers of hide and fur, the body beneath is working hard. Life in this world is not gentle. Every movement costs effort. Every day asks something of muscles, joints, lungs, and nerves. You are not sitting for long hours in chairs. You are walking, lifting, climbing, bending, carrying, again and again from childhood until your last step. Bones from people who lived around this time, and from Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, not far on either side of it, tell a quiet but unmistakable story. They show thickened areas where fractures once were, healed ribs, mended arms, vertebrae compressed from heavy loads. There are dents in skulls that knit back together, knife-like cuts on bones that closed over with new growth. These are not pristine skeletons. They are records of a lifetime of strain. You can imagine why. A slip on wet rock while carrying meat, a misjudged jump across a stream, a falling branch in a storm, a charging animal that doesn't turn aside in time. Even small accidents can be serious when your tools are sharp stone and your floor is uneven ground. Yet what stands out is not just the injuries but the healing. Many of these broken bones did not kill their owners. They had time to mend. That means something important. People with cracked ribs and shattered limbs were not left alone. In a world without plaster casts or antibiotics, survival with such injuries implies care. Others must have shared food with someone who could not hunt, fetched water for someone who could not walk, shielded the injured from cold and predators until bone knit and pain dulled. Skeletal remains of individuals with severe disabilities, spines twisted from disease, arms withered from old breaks, teeth worn down to nubs, show that some lived long past the moment of injury or illness. They did so because the group held them up. Even in death, the pattern continues. Burial sites from later Neanderthals and early modern humans show older individuals who had clearly been frail. Their very presence there suggests they were carried, tended, kept close. Still, the life you're imagining is short by modern standards. If you count everyone, infants, children, those who die in adolescence, the average lifespan might hover somewhere in the 30s. But averages can be misleading. Many never make it past their first few years. Birth itself is dangerous. Infection, bleeding, prolonged labour, all are risks without surgery or modern hygiene. For the women of your band, pregnancy and childbirth are constant thresholds. Pelvises from some early humans show evidence of difficult births, of joints strained and sometimes damaged by delivering large-brained infants. A labour that goes wrong can claim both mother and child. Each successful birth is a fragile triumph. If a baby survives its first vulnerable months, new dangers wait: fevers, stomach illnesses from bad water or contaminated food, infections from small cuts, parasites in the gut, respiratory infections in cold, smoky shelters. Without written records, we infer these from bone markers of stress, from arrested growth lines, from the patterns seen in later pre-agricultural peoples who live in similar ways. Adult deaths cluster around certain causes: accidents, hunting injuries, falls, occasional interpersonal violence, hinted at by healed or fatal trauma to skulls and ribs. There are signs of joint disease and arthritis in older individuals, their joints roughened by decades of constant motion and heavy loads. Teeth show heavy wear, sometimes down into the pulp, from a diet full of grit and tough fibres, and from using teeth as tools. And yet, some people clearly reach what, in that world, counts as old age, their 40s, 50s, perhaps beyond. Their teeth are worn to stumps, their joints deformed, but they are there. Longevity is not common, but it is possible. Those who reach it carry a lifetime of experience in their bodies and minds. Between sickness and health, there is a space where knowledge lives. By 100,000 years ago, it is very likely your ancestors know that some plants soothe and some harm. Later populations in Africa and Eurasia show genetic adaptations to handle plant toxins, and many traditional foragers today use a wide range of herbal remedies: leaves to cool fevers, roots to numb pain, resins to seal wounds. It is reasonable to think many of those practices have deep roots. Maybe someone in your band has learned that chewing certain bitter bark eases a pounding head, or that crushed leaves packed onto a cut slow the bleeding. Perhaps clays from particular banks calm an upset stomach, or smoke from certain plants keeps biting insects at bay. These discoveries do not arrive all at once. They accumulate one observation at a time, held in memory and story. Even simple practices matter. Washing a wound in clean running water instead of stagnant pools, keeping a sick person warmer or shaded from heat, feeding broth to someone who cannot chew. These are not high technology, but they can tip the balance between recovery and death. Pain is managed in ways that are part physical, part social, part spiritual. A hand held during a fever, a song murmured through the night watch, a charm of teeth or shell hung over a sleeping child. Whether or not such acts change the course of a disease, they change the experience of it. They say, you are not alone. Across all this difficulty runs a deep thread of resilience. Bodies adapt. Children raised on constant movement build strong bones and dense muscle early. Immune systems are trained by endless exposure to dirt, smoke, and microbes. Minds learn to navigate risk, where to place a foot, how to lift without tearing a tendon, when to retreat from an angry animal. The cost of mistakes is high, but so is the reward for caution, for skill, for cooperation. A band that knows how to splint a limb with bark and branches, how to rest a hunter and still keep everyone fed, how to guard a mother in the days after birth. Such a band is more likely to endure. Lying down at night in that world, bruised from the day's work, joints aching from the cold, you are not a solitary survivor. You are part of a small, living shield of care, woven from hands and memory. Your body bears the marks of strain, but it also carries the quiet proof that, again and again, in the face of injury and illness, your kind has found ways to heal. In the stillness between heartbeats, that resilience is another kind of warmth, as real as the fire at your feet. In this world, every old body begins as a small, fragile one. Picture a child born into your band. There is no separate nursery, no distant room. Life starts in the middle of everything, in the ring of light and smoke and breath. From the first day, that child is surrounded by voices, footsteps, the scrape of stone on stone, the rustle of hides, the soft clatter of tools. Anthropologists who study recent foraging peoples notice something striking. Children are rarely alone. It is reasonable to imagine something similar here. The baby is passed from mother to grandmother, to older siblings, to an aunt, to a cousin. Arms are many. Laps are shared. This is what researchers now call alloparenting, care by many hands, not just one. For your ancestors, it is practical as well as emotional. A woman who has just given birth still needs to gather food, mend clothing, help process meat. When she is tired, others step in. An older child might carry the baby at the hip while walking behind the adults, learning by watching and by feeling the small weight shift with each step. In these bands of 20 or 30 people, there are no formal schools. Learning happens in constant, almost invisible layers. Infants first learn the rhythm of the group, when it is time to move, when it is time to rest, when voices drop to whispers because there may be predators nearby. As they grow into toddlers, they begin exploring the immediate world, the texture of dirt, the taste of safe roots, the sharpness of a discarded flake of stone. Adults do not stand before them to lecture. They teach without naming it as teaching. A mother gently moves a child's hand away from a dangerous ember, maybe with a soft sound of warning. A father patiently lets small fingers touch a spear shaft, feeling the smoothness of the wood, then guides those hands back when the point comes near. An elder shows how to crack a nutshell by doing it slowly, exaggeratedly, letting little eyes track every movement. Play is the main classroom. Small children chase each other through grass and over rocks, inventing games that mimic the world they see. One might pretend to be the hunter, another the animal. They stalk, they pounce, they miss and laugh, then try again. In that laughter, they are rehearsing the patience and timing real hunts will require. There is archaeological evidence from later Paleolithic sites of miniature tools, tiny points, small spears, little grinding stones shaped like their adult counterparts, but too small for serious work. It is tempting to see these as toys, practice tools given to children so they can imitate what they see the adults doing. Even if we cannot be certain for this exact time and place, it is likely that imitation and scaled-down versions of adult tasks play a central role in learning. Children watch the gatherers, often women and older adolescents, move through the landscape. They see which plants are touched and which are left alone, which roots are dug and how deep, which berries are tasted and which are simply looked at and passed by. Soon, small hands start to copy, pulling up tiny shoots, carrying them back, asking with a look or a sound if this is right. Over years, knowledge seeps in. The child learns that a certain plant is good only after the first rains, that another must be roasted to drive out its bitterness, that a particular patch of ground means water is not far below. This is specialized, local, detailed learning carried not in books but in bodies and habits. The risks are never far away. Childhood here is not protected in the way it is in many modern societies. Fire burns skin quickly. Water in a swollen river can sweep away a small body. A stumble near a cliff edge, a misjudged climb, a playful poke at the wrong insect nest. Anyone can end a life. Predators, too, are a constant presence. A child who wanders too far from the group, too deeply into tall grass, might not return. Disease cuts deeper still. Many children do not survive their first years. We infer this from patterns seen later. Tiny skeletons in burial sites, growth lines on bones that show repeated stress, the way population structures tend to skew young. For your band, the loss of a child is both personal grief and practical injury. Every small life holds the promise of future hunters, gatherers, storytellers, healers. And yet, through these dangers, there is no sudden switch from child to adult. Instead, there is a long, gradual thickening of responsibility. A 6-year-old might carry small bundles of firewood or watch an even younger sibling while adults wade into shallow water to fish. A 10-year-old may be setting small traps for birds, helping to process meat, learning to shave thin curls of wood for kindling. Adolescents begin to join short hunts, first as extra eyes and ears, then as participants. Rites of passage, if they exist at this time, leave few clear traces, but many later foraging cultures mark the moment when a young person can first provide food on their own. In your imagined band, perhaps the first successfully tracked animal, the first full basket of gathered nuts, the first time a young hunter's thrown spear finds its mark, is quietly celebrated. Through it all, learning remains social. Mistakes are corrected with gestures, with modelled behaviour, with stories murmured around the fire about people who were careful and people who were not. Praise might be a shared look, a piece of meat placed in a young person's hand, the simple inclusion in adult tasks. Growing up in this world does not mean being shielded from hardship. It means being steadily folded into the collective skill of the band, wrapped in its watchful gaze. A child's mind born into risk is also born into guidance. Countless small acts of care and demonstration that together carry knowledge forward one fragile generation at a time. From the very beginning, all of that learning, those careful hands, those watchful eyes, depends on something less visible but even more powerful: communication. Long before anything like a modern sentence exists, your band is already swimming in signals. A shift of the shoulders that means danger, a certain cluck of the tongue that means no, not that route, a rising hum that gathers attention to a single point, a single person. Researchers sometimes talk about a gesture-first world, a time when hands and faces carried most of the meaning. It is possible your ancestors are still partly in that world. Imagine an early morning in camp. An elder wants to show a group of adolescents a new path to a water source. There may be a few simple sounds, grunts, calls, maybe short vocalizations that point to direction or urgency, but the real lesson is in the body. He stands, taps his chest, points to the young people, then sweeps his arm along the line of low hills. A twist of his wrist, fingers curled, might mean follow. A hand held flat, rocking side to side, might mean slowly or watch your step. Over time, these gestures become conventional. Everyone in the band knows them. They are not words yet, but they are more than random movements. They are a shared code. Alongside gesture, there is sound. Many animals use calls to warn of predators or signal food. Early humans almost certainly do the same. But something is changing. Instead of just a few fixed calls, the range of noises begins to expand. Different pitches, different rhythms, small variations in breath. The throat, tongue, and lips are becoming finely tuned instruments. Anatomical evidence hints at this shift. The shape of the modern human hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat that helps anchor the muscles of the tongue, is already present in some earlier species. The basic architecture that allows for complex speech seems to be in place long before clear evidence of full language. The base of the skull in our species shows a flexed angle, making room for a vocal tract capable of producing a wide range of sounds. The position of the larynx, the strength and control of breathing muscles, the wiring between brain regions that handle hearing and articulation together, these suggest that by around 100,000 years ago, your ancestors likely have the physical capacity for something approaching spoken language. Neanderthals show similar features. Fossil hyoid bones from them look remarkably like ours, and genetic evidence hints that they may share key genes involved in speech and language processing. This does not prove they speak as we do, but it makes it harder to imagine them as mute, growling brutes. More likely, they too have rich vocal systems, perhaps different in structure, but not simple. Still, anatomy is only part of the story. The real question is how your people use what their bodies allow. Think of your band at dusk, the day's work winding down. A hunter wants to describe where he saw a herd moving that afternoon. Gesture alone might convey some of it: the height of the animals, the direction they walked, the slope of the ground. But now imagine he also has a small set of agreed sounds, short, clipped syllables associated with that particular valley, that specific waterhole, that kind of grass. He points. He draws lines in the dirt. He makes those sounds. Others nod in their minds. A map forms. Over generations, these little vocal tags could multiply. One sound becomes associated with a certain animal, another with behind, another with tomorrow, another with danger from above. At first, perhaps, they are tightly bound to specific situations. But as memory and imagination grow, it becomes possible to recombine them. Animal tomorrow behind hill. No grammar book, no conscious rules, yet the pieces start to arrange themselves into patterns. Scientists debate when this sort of fully flexible symbolic language emerges. Some place it very early, tied to the first appearance of anatomically modern humans. Others argue for a later revolution, tens of thousands of years after the time we are imagining now. The archaeological record is suggestive but not decisive. Standardized stone tools, long-distance exchange of materials, coordinated hunting strategies, and possible symbolic objects all hint that by 100,000 years ago, something already quite advanced may be in play. What is less controversial is the role this growing complexity would have in survival. Language, whether still strongly mixed with gesture or already mostly spoken, lets your band do things no other animal group can do as well. They can plan together in detail. A hunt is no longer just everyone rushing toward the same animal. It becomes, you wait here, and I circle that way, and we drive them toward the ravine. They can describe events that happened days before or far away. Last dry season, the water in that direction failed. They can imagine possibilities. If we split, some go to the forest and some to the river, we may find more. They can negotiate and soothe. A disagreement over meat sharing is not settled only by strength or avoidance. There are explanations, justifications, promises, sounds that mean later, I owe you, next time. Over years, these verbal threads become the fabric of trust. Most profoundly, language ties generations together. Earlier, a child mostly learns by watching and doing. With more elaborated speech, an elder can pass on information that is not visible in the present moment. She can speak of a drought from long ago, when certain hidden springs still flowed. She can list in order the plants that are safe when others fail. She can tell a story about a person who ignored a warning and paid dearly for it. Story becomes a tool, not yet carved into stone or painted on cave walls, but held in memory and refreshed by repeated telling. Here is where cultural transmission accelerates. Knowledge need not be relearned from scratch each generation. It can be described, expanded, argued over. Ideas spread faster than genes. A useful technique discovered in one band can travel, word by word, gesture by gesture, through marriage ties and visiting kin, until people hundreds of miles away are using it. And yet, all of this remains partly hidden from us. Language does not fossilize. We cannot dig up a sentence. We infer from bones, tools, genes, and from the ways living humans and other primates communicate. Many details will always be uncertain. So, when you imagine your ancestors whispering by the fire, or calling softly in the dark as they search for a lost child, it is wise to hold that picture lightly. Perhaps their speech is rougher than ours, with fewer words and simpler structure. Perhaps it is already fluent and layered, capable of jokes, arguments, songs. More likely it sits somewhere in between, on a long, gradual slope toward the languages we speak today. What we can say with some confidence is that by 100,000 years ago, communication has become the invisible skeleton of their world. Gesture, voice, expression, and shared attention weave together into something new, a collective mind, spread across many bodies, remembering the past, coordinating in the present, and beginning, just barely, to talk about the future. All of that shared thought, all of that planning and memory does something else as well. It opens a space for questions that cannot be answered by touch or taste or sight. What happens when the breath stops? Where the warmth goes? Why one person wakes in the morning and another does not? Death is not new. Every animal encounters it. But a mind that can remember seasons, imagine tomorrow, and tell stories about before is also a mind that can notice endings and wonder. By 100,000 years ago, there are hints that your kind and your cousins are doing more than just abandoning a body to scavengers. The evidence is fragmentary, and it must be handled carefully. Bones do not come with explanations. Still, in caves in Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Africa, archaeologists have found skeletons that seem not to be accidents of nature. Bodies laid in hollows, limbs drawn up as if in sleep, skulls resting on flat stones. In some Neanderthal sites, piles of broken bones from animals cleared away, but a human skeleton left intact and protected under layers of sediment. In a few cases, traces of red ochre stain the earth around the bones, as if powdered iron-rich mineral had been sprinkled there on purpose. Is this ritual? Is it belief? One interpretation is simple practicality. A buried corpse does not draw predators into camp. Covering the dead may help keep disease at bay. A hollow in the cave floor might be the easiest place to put a body you can no longer move far. Another interpretation moves beyond utility. Careful placement, the use of ochre, the inclusion of objects, stone tools, animal bones, perhaps a piece of antler or a shell, suggests something else. That the dead person is being treated as more than refuse. That there is an idea, however hazy, of a continued existence. A journey, a status in the group that does not vanish the moment the chest stills. Neanderthal burials are especially discussed. In a cave at Shanidar, in what is now Iraq, several individuals seem to have been laid in pits. One skeleton, for a long time, was thought to rest in soil rich with pollen grains, leading to the famous image of flower burials. Later work suggested that burrowing rodents may have brought some of that pollen in. The romantic picture may be wrong, but even when old interpretations are revised, the core fact remains: some bodies are placed with intention. Early Homo sapiens sites show similar traces. In North and East Africa, skeletons dating close to the time we are imagining sometimes lie in flexed positions, dusted with ochre. In later periods, Clear grave goods appear, beads, tools, animal parts arranged around the dead. At 100,000 years ago we are at the edge of this pattern. Not yet the elaborate cemeteries of much later prehistory, but more than random bones in the dirt. What might your band think, standing around a freshly dug hollow? Perhaps they believe the dead person will need tools in another place, a mirror of this world where hunting and walking and sharing continue. A flake of stone near the hand, a piece of meat at the feet. Perhaps they think the red ochre is some kind of protection or mark, a way of helping the person be recognized by other beings beyond sight. Or perhaps the objects are not for the dead at all, but for the living. A focus for memory, a way of saying, here is where she is, so that stories about her skills, her jokes, her mistakes can gather in a single spot, anchored in the ground. Some researchers suggest that early people may have seen death not as a sudden severing but as a change of state. The person becomes a different kind of presence, dangerous, helpful, or both. Spirits of ancestors might be imagined watching over a camp, or causing misfortune if forgotten or offended. A strange noise in the night, a gust of wind, an illness with no visible wound could be explained as the action of unseen forces. Others caution against reading too much into a pit and a few stones. Erosion, animal activity, and later disturbances can rearrange bones into patterns that look meaningful. Our own desire for ancient religion can make us see priests and prayers where there were only practical decisions and chance. So most careful scholars speak in possibilities. The burial may indicate belief in an afterlife. It may show respect for the individual. It may simply be sanitation. Or it may be all of these at once, tangled together in ways we cannot fully separate. Whatever the precise meanings, one thing seems likely. Treating the dead with care changes the living, a group that comes together to dig, to lift, to cover, to stand in silence, or to murmur over a body, is doing more than work. They are reinforcing bonds, they are reminding each other who belonged to whom, whose child this was, whose sibling, whose partner. Shared grief, even without elaborate ceremony, is a powerful glue. Out of that glue, belief systems can grow, a sense that we are connected not just to each other, but to those who came before and those who will come after. A feeling that certain places are special because of what happened there. A memory, repeated in low voices as the fire burns down, of the one who died bravely, or mysteriously, or too soon. In such moments your ancestors are not only surviving, they are beginning to populate the dark beyond the firelight with meanings, presences, and possibilities. The world is no longer just animals, plants, stones, and weather. It is also filled with the unseen, with spirits, with the dead, with the unknown. If minds like yours are beginning to fill the darkness with unseen presences, something else almost inevitably follows. You start wanting to mark that unseen world, to leave traces of thoughts that cannot be eaten, worn, or burned for warmth. By 100,000 years ago, those traces are faint, but they are there, scattered through caves and shelters and old dunes like whispers. Often they begin with colour, red, especially red ochre, the iron-rich earth that shows up in sites across Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. It can be ground to a powder, mixed with fat or water, smeared on skin or stone or bone. In some places, blocks of ochre bear cross-hatched grooves, neat lines carved into their surfaces. The scratches might make the pigment easier to grind. They might also be decoration, or practice, or the first steps towards stable patterns that mean something to a watching mind. At a South African site called Blombos, miles and millennia away from the particular night we're imagining, a small piece of ochre was engraved with a deliberate geometric design, crisscrossing lines forming a kind of lattice. Its age is debated, but it hovers around this era and slightly later, a reminder that somewhere on the continent your species would eventually call home. Someone sat in the quiet light and took the time to incise a pattern that served no obvious survival function. Not a spear point, not a scraper, a mark for its own sake. In northern and eastern Africa, caves and rock shelters preserve similar hints. Pieces of ochre worn smooth as if by repeated rubbing, stones with lines and dots pecked into them, shells and bones stained red, perhaps from contact with painted skin, perhaps deliberately coloured. Nothing yet like the sprawling animal herds of later Ice Age cave art. No bison thundering across limestone walls, no horses in black and gold. Here art, if we dare call it that, looks more like preparation, like the first careful steps into a new mental landscape. Alongside colour come objects that seem to have been chosen, not because they are useful, but because they are beautiful or unusual. Seashells pierced with holes far inland from any ocean. Small beads made from the teeth of animals, from bits of bone, from carved pieces of soft stone. In some sites, dozens of these tiny items cluster around human remains, threaded together in life perhaps, and then accompanying the dead. In others they appear in living floors, scattered among hearths and sleeping places, lost like a dropped earring or a broken button. To make a bead you need time. You must drill or pierce or grind a hole. You must smooth edges so they do not cut the skin. You must think about how it will hang, how it will sit against hair or hide. From the point of view of sheer calories, this is inefficient work. From the point of view of social meaning, it may be priceless. A string of shells might signal who you are, part of a particular band or lineage, old enough to have passed a rite of passage, skilled enough to be given tokens by others. A specific pattern of colours or shapes might say, mother of two, or hunter of large game, or kin to that group beyond the hills. We do not know exactly what the patterns meant. The codes, if they existed, are lost. But the very existence of repeated ornament, similar bead types appearing over wide regions, suggests that these early humans were not just decorating themselves randomly. They were participating in shared traditions. In North Africa and the Levant, certain shells show up again and again, transported many miles from the sea. In southern Africa, particular styles of engraving and ochre use cluster in certain caves, but not others. In Europe, later Neanderthal layers contain eagle talons with cut marks, perhaps once suspended as pendants. Different regions, different species, all playing with the same idea that a body can carry signs. Why do this? Several possibilities weave together. One theory sees ornament as social technology. In a world where your survival depends on alliances, clear visual signals could help. A glance at someone's beads or body paint might tell you whether they are friend or stranger, marriage partner or taboo relative, member of a distant trading network or dangerous outsider. Symbols help compress complex social information into simple, readable form. Another theory emphasizes emotion and memory. A particular shell might recall a journey to the coast with a loved one. A carved bone might stand for an event, a story, a promise. Wearing it keeps the memory near the skin, tangible and visible. Some researchers suggest that early art and ornament might mark interactions with the unseen. Red ochre on a face could make someone resemble a spirit imagined in dreams. Lines scratched into stone could be attempts to capture visions, to fix a fleeting inner image into the outer world. A bead buried with a body might be a gift to whatever lies beyond breath. Others caution us, as always, to move carefully. A pierced shell could be a tinkling component of a practical rattle used to flush game from brush. An engraved stone might simply be a way to pass idle time, like doodling absent-mindedly. The meaning we feel in these marks today may not match the intentions of the hands that made them. Still, there is something undeniably new happening whenever a mark is made for reasons other than direct utility. To engrave a geometric pattern, you must hold the whole design in your mind while working on one tiny part of it. To repeat the same pattern again and again, and to teach it to others, requires the ability to detach an idea from a single moment and carry it forward through time. This is symbolic thought, the capacity to let one thing stand for another. Red pigment standing for blood, a spiral standing for water or journey or something we no longer recognize. A shell standing for a bond between people. A few lines standing for a story. Brains that can do this are brains that can also handle grammar, myth, law, and mathematics, though none of those formal systems exist yet. The seeds, however, are being watered, each scratch on stone, each painted body, each bead threaded onto a strip of sinew, exercises neural pathways that will one day support writing and music and the complex symbols of modern life. We should also remember how fragile our evidence is. Much early art would have been made on perishable materials, on skin, on wood, on soft earth, on the smooth temporary canvas of a body washed by rain. The oldest surviving objects may simply be the luckiest, not the most important. Wooden carvings rot, feather headdresses disintegrate. Painted skin disappears in a night. What we see in the archaeological record are the hardy remnants of a much richer symbolic world that mostly melted away. So, when you imagine your Paleolithic band at rest, do not see only naked, unadorned bodies in a colourless landscape. Imagine streaks of red along forearms and cheeks, simple patterns drawn on the flat slab near the fire. A child holding up a shiny stone as if it is treasure. A young woman patiently grinding a shell, threading it onto a string, smiling because it matches the others she already wears. In these quiet, almost invisible acts, your ancestors are transforming their world. Rocks and bones and bits of shell are no longer just things. They are becoming signs, signals that minds like yours are at work, weaving meaning into matter, turning the ordinary stuff of earth into carriers of identity, memory, and belief. The night around the fire is still full of predators, hunger, and cold, but it is also now full of marks, lines, colours, objects that say, softly but clearly, we are more than bodies. We are stories, patterns, and signs. For all the beads and pigments and quiet stories, life is still stretched over a constant humming tension. Something out there always wants to eat you or take what you have, or simply be in the same place you are at the same time, with consequences written in blood. In the darkness, beyond the firelight, real eyes gleam. Depending on where your band lives, they belong to different hunters. In parts of Africa, there are lions, heavier and more powerfully built than many modern populations. Hyenas, not just scavengers, but organised, muscular predators with jaws that can crack bone you would need a stone hammer to break. Leopards, patient and nearly invisible, able to drag a human-sized body up into a tree. Elsewhere, there are packs of wolves or wild dogs. Big cats you've never seen before, like the scimitar-toothed and saber-toothed predators that still haunt some regions. Bears in forests and mountains. Crocodiles sliding through slow water. Even seemingly harmless animals can turn lethal. A startled hippo, a cornered buffalo, a territorial rhinoceros. We know this not just from imagination, but from marks on ancient bones. Human remains from Pleistocene sites sometimes bear punctures that match lion or leopard teeth, skulls with neat circular holes aligned with big cat canines, long bones gnawed in patterns typical of hyenas. In some caves, human bones are mixed with those of prey animals, all processed by carnivores, suggesting that the cave was first their den, not your shelter. Your species did not start at the top of the food chain. It climbed there slowly, and the climb was slippery. Predators are not the only danger. Other humans or near humans are also on the land. By 100,000 years ago, there is evidence that violence sometimes flared within and between groups. Healed fractures in skulls that matched the force of a club or thrown stone, rib bones pierced by projectiles, skeletons with embedded stone points that were never removed in life. At some sites, bodies seem to have been dumped hastily, without the care given to others nearby, perhaps victims of conflict, perhaps scapegoats of some internal dispute. We should be cautious. Not every broken bone is a murder. People fall. They are kicked by animals. Stones tumble from cliffs. But the pattern across many sites suggests that interpersonal violence, while probably not constant, was an expected part of life. Rival bands might compete over a water hole during a dry spell, over a stand of fruit trees in good season, over access to a cave that offers unique safety. Sometimes these encounters could end in trade, marriage, or shared information. Sometimes they likely ended with bodies on the ground. And then there is the earth itself, shifting underfoot. The climate of this era remains restless. Sudden cold snaps, heat waves, unseasonal storms. A week of relentless rain, swelling rivers into sweeping, brown walls that carry away children and elders who cannot run fast enough. Lightning striking dry grass and turning the world into a flickering horizon of flames. A quiet slope turned deadly by a collapse of rock or a mudslide after heavy weather. There are no forecasts, no maps, only memories, the tale of the time the river changed course, the year of ice on the ground for so long that even the elders cannot recall its like. These stories are not entertainment. They are instructions in how to live with a landscape that can kill without warning. In the face of all this, your ancestors do not simply wait for fate. They organize their lives around risk. Night fires are placed where wind carries scent away from likely predator paths. Sleeping circles put children and the very old in the center, flanked by strong adults. People rarely wander alone, especially at dusk or dawn when many hunters move. Trails are chosen not only for speed, but for visibility. Ridges instead of gullies, open woodland instead of dense thicket where something large might be crouched. Scouts go ahead when the band moves into new territory. Ears tuned for the alarm calls of birds and monkeys that can betray the presence of a stalker. Feet read the ground, fresh tracks of lion or hyena. A human footprint that isn't one of your own. The landscape itself becomes a text, and everyone learns to read. Tools you've already heard about are also part of this safety net. Spears and stone points are not only for hunting, but for making a stand when something charges. Fire hardens spear tips, but it also keeps most predators at the edge of sight. Smoke is used to keep insects and disease-carrying pests away from sleeping places. Simple shelters are oriented to take advantage of prevailing winds, reducing exposure to cold and damp that can sap the strength needed to survive a bad season. Danger shapes the social fabric just as much as it shapes behavior. Trust is not an abstract virtue. It is the knowledge that the person next to you will not bolt and leave you alone when the brush explodes with movement. That someone will notice if you have not returned by nightfall and organize a search. That if you are injured, others will carry you, costing them time and safety and calories. Bands that cannot cooperate under pressure do not last. Their lineages wink out, leaving little trace. So constant threat may have favoured those who formed strong bonds, who felt loyalty and empathy, who could coordinate quickly without long explanations. The same minds that string beads and scratch designs into ochre are also running quiet calculations about who can be relied on, who tends the fire carefully, who panics. This ever-present edge of danger also sharpens vigilance. Children grow up listening to cautionary tales at the fire, learning which animal tracks mean stay away, which cloud shapes hint at a coming storm, which places along the riverbank are undercut and treacherous. They are taught to move silently when needed, to freeze when an adult's hand tightens on their arm. Life is not unrelenting terror. There is laughter, play, affection, long stretches of ordinary routine. But beneath it all lies an awareness that the boundary between living and not living is thin. A misstep near a cliff, a misjudged crossing in floodwater, a broken leg far from camp, a scratch that becomes an infection in a world without antibiotics. Death is not an abstract concept pondered at the end of a long, safe life. It is a frequent visitor arriving in many forms, familiar enough that even the young understand it, and yet this very fragility may have intensified the value of each moment, of each shared meal, each successful hunt, each calm night by the fire when nothing attacks and no one dies, knowing deep in bone and breath how easily everything can be lost. Your ancestors cling to one another. They watch, they prepare. They move carefully through a world that is beautiful, rich, and always, always dangerous. From this tension between vulnerability and skill, between threat and cooperation, something powerful is forged. A species that survives not by strength alone, but by awareness, memory, and mutual care. A species ready to follow the seasons, track the herds, and carry its fragile, resilient life across continents. You do not stay in one place. The dangers, the shifting weather, the rising and falling of food, all push your band into motion. Not a frantic running, but a long, slow pattern drifting over the land. Many groups at this time were probably not aimless wanderers, but seasonal migrants moving within a familiar territory the way the rain and the animals moved. Imagine the year not as a circle but as a path. When the first cool mornings come and certain flowers open, it might be time to leave the low river and climb toward the hills where nuts are ripening. When a particular insect begins to sing at night, you know the big herds will start following fresh grass, and you plan routes that intersect with their path. When the river shrinks and the shallow pools appear, fish and trapped animals become easier to catch, but water itself grows uncertain, and you may have to shift camp more often. No one has a calendar on a wall, but everyone carries one in memory. The elders remember the years when the dry season came early, when a certain valley failed, when fruit trees bloomed twice. Hunters remember where they found tracks in past seasons, which ridges gave them wind advantage, where they saw vultures circling over kills. Gatherers remember which slopes held hidden roots even in hungry months, which stands of trees still bore fruit after others were stripped bare. Decisions about when to move are made inside this web of memory. There is no chief with a written map. Instead, decisions probably unfold in layers of talk. Someone notices that the river is lower than it should be. Someone else mentions the taste of dust in the evening wind. An elder repeats a story of the year, the band waited too long, and people went hungry. Slowly, almost organically, a direction becomes agreed upon. Not with formal votes, but with nods, with repeated phrases, upstream. 2 sleeps, maybe 3. Back to the place with the red cliffs. Over the ridge where the figs grow. When the choice is clear enough, the band begins to pack the world it owns. There are no wagons, no pack animals in most places. Almost everything you have must be carried on human backs and in human hands. That means you own very little. Tools are precious and few. A couple of hearthstones for carrying embers, carefully shaped blades, maybe a handful of spare points, some bone awls or needles, cordage, a fire drill. Containers made from skins, woven fibres, or hollowed gourds hold water. dried meat, gathered seeds. Sleeping wraps of hide or plant fibre are rolled and slung over shoulders. Personal ornaments, beads, pierced teeth, coloured stones are threaded onto cords or tied into hair so you don't risk losing them. Children too young to walk far are carried against hips and backs in slings, their weight part of the daily labour. Older children walk, sometimes proudly bearing small loads, a bundle of kindling, a basket of foraged food, a light spear that is more symbol than weapon. Very old people move at the pace they can, supported when they tire. The speed of the band is the speed of its slowest member. Because carrying is so costly, every object is evaluated in terms of movement. A heavy stone used for grinding may be left cached under a distinctive rock or tree to be reclaimed when the band returns next season. Piles of good quality flint nodules might be hidden in a crevice. Firewood gathered in surplus can be stacked in a dry hollow as a future gift from your past self. Archaeologists sometimes find these silent clues, repeated use of the same rock shelter over thousands of years, scatters of tools that suggest places visited again and again. Over time, the band's movements inscribe invisible lines on the landscape. There are preferred campsites, a bend in the river where fish are easy to trap, a cave mouth with morning sun, a grove where the soil stays soft and cool. There are known dangers you give wide berth, a marsh that hides crocodiles, a cliff where stones fall after rain, a stretch of plain claimed by a rival group. These paths and nodes form what anthropologists sometimes call a home range, though it may cover dozens or hundreds of miles. Within it, nothing is truly random. You know which valley holds good grazing and will attract herbivores. You know where flint can be found, where certain medicinal plants grow, where crossing a river is safest in flood. This way of life demands a deep, almost intimate awareness of the environment. Cloud shapes are not just pretty, they hint at approaching weather. The angle of the sun, the feel of the air at dawn, the smell of distant rain on wind-borne dust, all feed into quiet calculations. Birdsong changes when a predator moves through, but it also shifts with seasons, marking when nests will be full of eggs. The colour of grass tells you not only how long since it rained, but which animals will be feeding there, and how strong they are likely to be. In such a world, land is not owned as a fenced plot. It is known as a pattern in time. You know this waterhole as it is in the high rains and in drought, and in the dangerous weeks when shrinking banks bring predators and prey into close, volatile contact. You know this grove in the cool season, heavy with fruit, and in the hungry time when the bark itself can be peeled and chewed to quiet the stomach. Movement stitches these moments together. Each journey is not just going from one place to another. It is updating a mental map that spans years and lifetimes. Children learn it step by step, their small footprints overlaying the tracks of parents and grandparents along the same routes. Stories told at night become instructions by day. This is where the old river used to run. This is where your mother killed the great antelope. This is where we do not sleep, because the ground remembers a bad flood. Nomadism is sometimes imagined as rootlessness, but for your ancestors it was the opposite. By following the seasons, tracking herds and circling through familiar places at the right times, they grew roots not in a single spot of earth, but in entire landscapes. Their home was not a village, but a moving relationship with rivers, hills and skies they understood with a precision most of us have lost. And this constant attentive motion, this dance with the seasons would carry them, slowly and steadily, far beyond the horizons they could see. As you follow that slow, steady path across the landscape, it can be easy to forget just how extraordinary this way of life really is. From a distance, it might look simple. A small band, a few tools, a fire, some hides, a trail worn through grass. But when you look closer, when you sit beside the hearth and listen, you start to see the layers. Every movement is the tip of an iceberg of memory. Every decision about where to walk, what to eat, whom to trust, rests on years of observation and teaching. The tools in your hands are the current version of designs refined across thousands of generations. The stories told in the dark carry fragments of events so old that no one remembers when they first began. We often imagine Paleolithic life as raw survival, all hunger and fear. Yet what emerges from the bones, the tools, the ancient hearths, is something more complicated and more familiar. You see resilience in the way bands adapt when herds change their routes or rivers shift. Ingenuity in the way a single piece of stone can be turned into knife, scraper, spear point, each flake shaped with practiced intention. Quiet complexity in the way children are taught, in the care for injured members, in the rituals that may have surrounded death and the unseen. You see cooperation woven through everything, hunts that require trust and timing, sharing of meat that keeps the group whole even when luck runs uneven. Knowledge of plants and animals held not by one person, but scattered across many minds, joined together in conversation and story. You see minds not so different from your own, working with the materials at hand, shaped by a world that demanded attention, patience, and flexibility. And yet, for all we can infer, there is so much we still do not know. We read ash layers, cut marks, pollen grains, and DNA. But the everyday thoughts and feelings of those people remain just beyond reach. We can propose theories about how they spoke, what they believed, how they pictured the sky and the spirits of the dead, but we cannot be certain. New discoveries, a child's footprint in ancient mud, an unfamiliar type of tool, a fragment of painted rock, still have the power to rewrite whole chapters of this story. The deep past is not a closed book. It is a slowly brightening room where each new find brings a little more into view, but also casts new shadows. If you've enjoyed wandering through that room tonight, exploring what life might have been like 100,000 years ago, you might gently tap the like button, or subscribe if you'd like to fall asleep to more journeys into other times. If you feel awake enough, you can leave a comment and share where in the world you're listening from. A modern echo of scattered bands, still connected across vast distances. If your curiosity is still quietly humming in the background, there's a book about prehistoric secrets waiting for you at sleepytimehistory.com, where these ideas are explored in even more depth for whenever you're ready to read. But for now, you don't need to remember any of the names or the dates or the technical details. You can just let the images drift, a small fire under a star-heavy sky, figures huddled close, whispering in a language no one speaks anymore, thinking thoughts that would still make sense to you. The soft crunch of footsteps on a night path, the feeling of a whole landscape as home. Let those echoes of a distant past fade gently into the dark at the edges of your mind. Let the long, patient rhythm of their days blend with your own breathing. Their story continues in you, and as you drift, you can follow them into sleep, walking quietly beside their fires under the same old stars.